Welcome to a compilation of every single part that I've created of the entire plot of Crown of Midnight. Now, I will tell you that this series has developed a lot over the past year. So when I first started it, I did not have a great setup, I did not have good lighting or video quality, and frankly, sometimes not even the best audio quality. But I swear, if you stick with the series, it does get better. I'm currently finishing Queen of Shadows. If you're seeing this and you didn't know that I broke the books down into smaller pieces, and you would rather digest this video in smaller pieces, I'll definitely be linking the individual episodes down below. Thank you for clicking on this episode of the entire plot with Ruby Jean Reads, and you can now enjoy a crazy long video.
Chapter 1. Selena is on one of her assassin jobs for the king. She's already broken into someone's house late in the night, and she sneaks up to his bed and she's ready to make the kill. And in this situation, Selena was ordered to kill Lord Norral and his wife for unknown reasons. So they're sleeping in their bed and she sneaks up with her sword, and she's basically ready to him in his sleep. And that's all. Chapter 2. Flash forward to Selena presenting the head of Lord Norral to the king. They're in the throne room. Kale and Dorian are actually there as well. And in pure assassin fashion, she just kind of throws this bag with a head in it at the feet of the king. He's upset because the head is unrecognizable. You cannot tell who this man is. And Selena's like, well, if you wanted a clean job, you should have asked for a clean job. And then she informs him that the rest of the remains are at the bottom of the ocean. The king informs her that her money is up in her rooms ready to go, but he has her next name. But it's not just a singular name. The king is now aware of a rebel movement going on in his kingdom. He already has a whole list of names, but for some reason that we don't really understand, he's giving Selena just one name at a time, and then as soon as she makes the kill, she gets the next name on the list. So the king hands her the first sheet of paper with the first name on it. And the name is Archer Finn. Now, we don't know who this is yet, but Selena reveals to us that she knows Archer Finn. He was at the Assassin's Keep. He wasn't trained to be an assassin like her, but he did learn self-defense at the Assassin's Keep. So they do know each other from there. And then basically tells her, oh, by the way, you have 1 month to this man, or I'm sending you back to the prison camp Endovir. Let's jump to Dorian's POV, because he's also in this throne room. Dorian is disturbed by Selena, because if you think about it, in the first book, he didn't really see her in her assassin element. He saw her basically playing in a tournament where she showed aggression for sure, but she wasn't murdering people. And as disturbed as he also is attracted to it a little bit. It's a little disturbing, but he calls her a beautiful wraith. If you remember, she ended book 1 by telling Dorian hey, this is never gonna happen. This is the first time he's really entertaining the thought, what if she just played him and manipulated him to win the tournament? And then he decides that he's gonna confront her about that. Let's see how that goes. Now let's jump back to Selena's POV because it's later in the day and she's with Kale and he calls her out. Apparently the brutality that she showed in the throne room is not who she is, and Kale and her work very closely together now, so he has a pretty good idea of who she is as a person. He's also the only one who knows that the killings the king's putting her on is really taking a toll on her. She puts a face on for everyone else, but she lets herself be herself with Kale. As always, because it's his job, Kale wants a debrief and Selena's just absolutely not, I'm not feeling up to it. But Kale tells her that he literally is worried sick every single time she leaves. Not because he doesn't think that she's capable, but because he's actually really worried about her and he's grown to care about her as a person. Let's jump forward a couple hours. Selena gives in, she debriefs Kale. Philippa cleans her off after she's been slumming it for the past couple weeks. And now she's alone in her rooms and she's surprised how easy it's been to lie to Kale and the king. I'm sorry, what? Selena has not been killing anyone. None of the names that the king has given her up to this point has she actually killed. Every single time she's given a name, she hunts the person down and then gives them an option. Either die right then and there, or take on a whole new identity and disappear forever. So far, every single person has chosen to take on a new identity and disappear. She basically goes to hospitals and infirmaries where there's dead people and takes their bodies and then recreates crime scenes that reflect the debrief that she gives Kale and the king. Here's the problem now. Archer Finn, not only does she know him, but he's extremely well known in social circles. Like, he is so popular, and she's wondering how in the world she's gonna make him disappear. Chapter 3, Selena tells us that she's been having actually a lot of nightmares about the Ridderak and Kane. Something else that's really spooked her about Kane that she really can't figure out is why he knew so much about her past. Like, before Terrasen was demolished and before she was found in a river almost frozen to death, he knew so much about her previous life, and she's never told anyone any of that stuff. So she's still trying to figure out why he knows half the stuff he knew. So Selena and Nehemia are hanging out as best friends do, and Selena decides to tell Nehemia about this rebel movement that the king is so worried about. Nehemia is really tense about this and asks a crazy ton of questions, all of which Selena can't answer. All she knows is that there is one. She doesn't even know what this rebel movement is or what it's founded upon. She just knows that one exists. Weird topic change, but do you guys remember Endovir, the slave camp that Selena was at the beginning of book 1? So apparently there's another slave camp. I want to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. So there's another prison camp called Calcutta. This one is significantly more brutal than even Endovir was. This is the most brutal slave camp that you could ever be sent to, and it is full of Eoway people, aka Princess Nehemia's people. The King of Adarlan is like really pushing that this place be even more brutal and that it be expanded and that they fill it with even more Eoway people. So obviously Nehemia's upset, she's angry, she's hurt, she's frustrated. Selena just clams up. Like, they talk about everything, but for some reason, every single time this comes up, maybe it's Selena still dealing with her trauma of being stuck at a slave camp for a year, but she just will not entertain any sort of conversation with Nehemia about this slave camp. Chapter 4, Kale and Selena are going on a run together, as they always do, and we're actually going to experience this chapter through Kale's eyes. He's dealing with the trauma of having killed Kane. Kale opens up to Selena about it because obviously she would understand it better than anyone, and she does share the story of her first kill and also how hard it is for her, and she basically says that she carries every killing in her heart, like everywhere she goes, and it's never been easy for her. And then she reminds Kale something really important. He didn't just kill Kane just to kill Kane. He saved Selena's life. If he did not kill Kane, Selena would be dead. So they finish their run, they're heading back to the castle, and apparently sometime between book 1 and book 2, Kale has become a hunk and is attracting all the attention of the ladies of the court. Do I sense jealousy from Selena? Yes, I do. So Selena and Kale start talking about her upcoming assignment, which is Archer Finn, and basically Selena lets Kale know that yes, she knows him, but she still needs to track him because she hasn't seen him or heard from him in over a year or more. Honestly, I don't think they say how long it's been since they've seen each other, but it's been a long time. So she needs to go scout it out. And Kale offers to help her on the assignment. As she's basically telling Kale, over my dead body, they run into Dorian. But Dorian is not alone. Dorian is with Roland Havillard, Dorian's cousin. We don't like Roland. I'm just letting you know off the bat, we don't like him. We never do like him. Okay, good talk. And he reveals that not only is he now in Adarlan, but he's also been invited to be a part of the King's Council. And he's going to be around. And then not only does Dorian hate Roland, but we find out that Kale hates Roland so much that they actually got in a brawl in the past 4, and Kale knocked Roland out. And more on that later. So we're gonna actually jump to Dorian's point of view because it is killing him to see Selena and Kale together. Like, absolutely killing him. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, it wasn't ever gonna happen. As much as I love it in book 1, it makes sense for the rest of the series that they're just not a thing, and that's okay. That's fine. So we're actually gonna go back to Selena's point of view, but in her rooms later that day, because Dorian decides that he's finally gonna have that confrontation with her, that she used him to win the tournament. Instead, he kind of chickens out because he realizes like he doesn't want to stir the pot or make things any worse, so he just tells her like, hey, I want to be friends. Like, I know us being a thing didn't really work out, but I still like you as a person. I'd like to be friends. They agree that they should be friends, but at the same time, Selena doesn't want to get too close to him because she knows inevitably they're just both gonna get hurt in the end. Chapter 5, Selena is spying on Archer from the rooftops. And it's kind of sad because now that she's not confined to the castle, castle and she can actually adventure around the kingdom to do her jobs. She's starting to have a lot of flashbacks of her time in Rifthold as an assassin in the Assassin's Keep. And it wasn't exactly a happy life or an exciting life, so this isn't like a sweet nostalgic flashbacks. It's like straight up traumatic flashbacks. So I guess she figures out everything she needs to know. So she heads back to the castle and she has dinner with Dorian in his rooms. And we also find out that this has become like routine for them. Like they just hang out all the time. It's really sweet. Like she's just eating her dinner and reading a book and he's working and doing paperwork and whatever else he does, I guess. Now, there's actually a really big conversation that happens here, and honestly, if you read Assassin's Blade first, then that's fine. I'm not going to judge you, although I definitely give very strong opinions about how I think you should read the series in this video. But they do have a conversation about something that does happen in Assassin's Blade. In my opinion, I think we just need to skip this conversation for now, but he starts to see her more and more as a human being. Also, this is where he gets to learn about Sam and that she loved someone who was murdered. Yeah, and I think that just gives him a lot of perspective on why she feels so strongly about the things that she does. Anyways, I'm just not going to dive deep into the details because we're going to really go in depth on all that stuff when we do Assassin's Blade, which I might do after Heir of Fire or after Crown of Midnight. I haven't decided yet, so if you have an opinion on when you want me to do Assassin's Blade, please drop that below in the comments because that will really help me know which book to do next. I guess as like a return for Selena getting so vulnerable about her past, Kale decides to share something about his past. And we don't get this often, okay? We really don't get a lot from Kale. He shares why he hates Roland so much. Kale had a girlfriend, for lack of better words, and he loved her, or at least he thought he loved her. Roland, for the sake of putting Kale in his place, basically seduced his girl, got her to cheat on Kale. And when Kale found out about it, obviously he was super heartbroken and upset, but then he Roland and knocked him out. So was he able to get even? No. But did the vengeance feel a little good? I'm sure it did. So after a couple heart-to-hearts, Kale starts to walk Selena back to her room. And basically they just decide that they feel closer to each other after opening up to each other a little bit more. And they're just all happy, warm, cuddly, fuzzy feelings about their friendship. But after Kale drops Selena off in her rooms, she cannot go to sleep. She's very stir crazy, so she decides just to make a quick trip down to the library and get a book. Because what else do you do when you can't sleep? You read a book. But as she's on her way down to the library, she sees a cloaked figure. His hood is up so high that she cannot see this person's face at all. And then it like turns towards her and starts walking in her direction. This gets so weird. The Eye of Elena, her amulet that the ghost of Queen Elena gave her, starts to glow. And then the cloaked figure starts hissing like a literal feral animal. It runs away in a very animalistic manner. So Selena decides, you know what? I don't need a book anymore tonight. And then she hightails it to her rooms as well. And honestly, I don't blame her. If I were her, I'd be running back to my rooms like my life depends on it. Because it kind of does. Chapter 6. Selena gets back to her rooms and she realizes that she needs answers from the Queen of Elena, like, right now. So she goes down to the tombs. But when she gets down to the tombs, she hears a voice go, "Aren't you gonna knock?" The skull door knocker on the door is talking to her. This did not happen in book 1. This is strictly a book 2 thing. But honestly, this door knocker, he is the sassiest character of all the characters in this book series. And he reveals that his name is Mort. And he is a magical door knocker, but he didn't talk to her in the first book because he didn't think she could handle magic yet. But now that she's obviously seen a lot of stuff, he figured, might as well throw a talking doorknob at her. So this door knocker, Mort, decides to tell Selena that the Queen Elena is actually not in the tombs right now. Because apparently when she siphoned all the poison from Selena and banished the army of the dead, it burnt her out. So she needs to like stay away for a little bit, I guess, to like regain her ghostly energy. I'm not gonna pretend like I understand how that works, but she needs a break. She needs some time off. I'm just gonna read this next part because my words are not gonna do it justice. And it's way too important for me to botch this for y'all. "It's not over yet, is it?" Selena asked Mort at last. "No," Mort said, quieter than he'd been before. This is what Selena had been dreading for weeks, for months. Let's hear the message, Selena said, sighing. Mort cleared his throat and in a voice that sounded eerily like the Queen's. If I could leave you in peace, I would. But you have lived your life aware that you will never escape certain burdens. Whether you like it or not, you are bound to a fate of this world. As the King's champion, you are now in a position of power, and you can make a difference in the lives of many. Cain and the Ridderak were just the beginning of the threat to Aurelia. There is a far deadlier power poised to devour the world. And I have to find it, I suppose? Yes, there will be clues to lead you, signs you must follow. Refusing to kill the King's targets is the first and smallest step. You may have many questions at this point, I know I did, but as always, you're not going to get answers for a while. You just gotta hold tight, keep your curiosity. So Selena then tells Mort about the freaky creature in the library who was all animalistic and hissy and weird. Mort all but confirms that this is all definitely connected to the King of Aderlin. You must discover where the King's power comes from and what he plans to do before it's too late. Selena snorted. Don't you understand? It's already too late. It's been too late for years now. Where was Elena 10 years ago when there was a whole host of heroes that she could have her pick of? Where was she in her ridiculous quest when the world truly needed them? When Terrasen's heroes were cut down or hunted and executed by Aderlin's armies? Where was she when the kingdoms fell one by one to this king? The world is already in ruin and I won't go on some fool's errand. Mort just glowered at her. You're that selfish, that cowardly. Why did you come here tonight, Selena? To help us all or just to help yourself? Elena told me about you, about your past. And then Selena just storms back to her rooms because she just decides, you know what? I don't have to answer to a sassy door knocker. And I understand that's a lot of information and you probably feel like you're missing something, and you are. And you're not gonna get it for a while. So just hang tight. Chapter 7. Selena's basically fighting this inner war now because she knows something's happening and she wants to help stop it, but she doesn't want to be the one responsible for needing to stop it. She also knows that she needs to figure out this whole Archer Finn situation, so she decides she's going to run into Archer on accident, and she decides to bring Kale along for this part because he's been practically begging for her to take him on a mission. And because she's been tracking him, or basically the assassin way of saying stalking him, she knows that he's going to be at tea, so she takes Kale and they're gonna go wait for a reservation at the tea place that they know Archer Finn goes to. So she and Kale pretend like they're waiting for a table, and then surprise, surprise, she just happens to run into Archer Finn. And here's the thing, Archer is very excited to see Selena. He might be a little too excited to see Selena. This is also where we learn that he has a pet name for her, and he calls her Lena. As you probably expected, Kale, who's supposed to be playing the part of the silent chaperone, is absolutely boiling inside. So they decide to catch up for a minute, and there's flirting. Archer is a shameless flirt. He might be worse of a flirt than Dorian or Roland even, which is saying a lot. While catching up, he asks her how Endovir was, because the last thing he heard about her was that she was caught and sent to the prison camp. She tells him about her year there, she tells him about the competition and how she won it, and now she's the King's assassin. Archer apologizes for what happened to Sam, because he did hear about that scenario as well, and then asks if Selena knows if Arobin knows she's back or not. Neither of them really know, but honestly, considering how well connected he is, he probably does know. Unfortunately, that's just kind of unavoidable. And then Archer asks her on a date of sorts. He says like, hey, let's get dinner and catch up. And she says yes. So we're gonna jump back to Kale's point of view because he is fighting a temper right now when he's talking to Selena. But what's funny is that out of all of that, he is by far the most upset about the fact he calls her Elena, but he is very pleased when Selena shares with him that she actually hates that nickname. It helps him feel a little bit better about the situation. Chapter 8, Selena's given a side quest to be a guard at a fancy royal dinner that's gonna have a lot of nobility and festivities. So Selena's just observing from the back, and she sees Roland sitting with Dorian, and she basically picks up a lot of really sketchy things about him. We don't know what exactly, but she just knows like this kid is trouble and he's going to drag Dorian down with him. So she decides she needs to warn Dorian. But then we jump to Dorian's point of view, and he keeps catching Selena looking in his direction, but it's not like looking at him like she's interested in him. She's studying him, and he doesn't know how he feels about that. But he notices whenever she's not looking at him, she's looking at Kale. And when she's looking at Kale, she has a look of endearment, and that is absolutely killing Dorian inside. And then he also kind of has this moment where he's like, how blind was I? Like, how long have they clearly had feelings for each other and I just couldn't see it because I was blinded by my infatuation with Selena. So out of anger, he starts to storm out of the dining room. He's like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going back to my royal chambers. And on his way out, Selena chases him and she's like, hey, I need to talk to you. I think Roland's a bad influence and he's gonna tear you down. And he's like, I think that you just manipulated me and my feelings and used me to win the tournament. And she's like, seriously, dude? Like, you're playing this with me right now? What's going on? So much for being friends, you know? Obviously, that's kind of a dumpster fire. Dorian leaves, and then Selena, instead of going back to her rooms, decides that she's gonna go down to the dungeon prison cells and she's gonna visit Kaltain Rompier. Kaltain has been rotting down in the prison for 2 months now. Chapter 9. Selena has a lot of questions for Kaltain, specifically involving Roland. Kaltain only really shares that he can't be trusted and refuses to give more information. But when Selena goes to push, she realizes that Kaltain's really jumpy. And Kaltain says that apparently the night guard has been turning their back and letting Parrington make visits to her at night. And she has bruises all over her wrists and she's covered in injuries. And Parrington's basically been coming in almost every single night and just abusing her, and the night shift has basically turned their backs and pretended like they didn't know anything. So Selena sympathizes with Kaltain in this moment because although Kaltain isn't necessarily a good person, she doesn't deserve this. So she decides that she's just gonna let Kaltain be and she's not gonna, you know, threaten her anymore to give her more information. And then she also decides that she is going to tell Kale about the night guard because it needs to be put to an end. And then on her way out, she decides to leave her cloak with Kaltain because it's absolutely freezing down there and she thought the least she could do is give her something to warm her. And then Kaltain makes a very interesting comment. She says, I don't believe I was ever brought here to marry Parrington. They have always wanted me here for another reason. That is very interesting, don't you think? Sarah J. Maas doesn't put stuff like that in books just for funsies. Like that means something. Selena, first thing she does is she goes to Kale and she tells him about the night guard. Second thing she does is she goes to Nehemia and tells her everything. And then while she's talking with Nehemia, Kale comes back a moment later with absolutely bloodied knuckles and says the night guard is no longer going to be a problem and we're just going to trust him on that one. All of this talk kind of gets them back to the corruption of the king and Duke Parrington because clearly Kaltain was used and manipulated. Nehemia starts reminiscing about a time where honor ruled in Aderlin, but it was no match for Terrasen. Now, Terrasen is where Selena's from, but apparently it was like the kingdom of the time. Like, it had the most power of all the kingdoms. They basically just set the example of a kingdom ruled by just and kind and good people. This is also where we learn that Terrasen was the first conquered kingdom in Aderlin's quest for dominating all of Irelia, because apparently if Terrasen had known what Aderlin was up to, they would have prepared an army that Aderlin could not have competed with. And also on top of that, everyone would have come up behind Terrasen because it was literally like the kingdom to beat. So Aderlin went at them hard and fast in a super unexpected, sneaky way. And then Nehemia poses an interesting question. Do you think another court like that could ever rise again? Not just in Terrasen, but anywhere. I've heard the court in Wendelin, a new kingdom that we haven't talked about yet, but we will revisit, still follows the old ways, but they're across the ocean and do us no good. They looked in the other direction while the king enslaved our lands, and they still refuse all calls for aid. Then Selena basically says, this is too heavy of a conversation for breakfast. And then just asks Nehemia, so what's new in your life? So this is another scenario where Selena just kind of shuts down Nehemia, and even though they're friends who talk about everything, like Selena's just not wanting to talk about a lot of stuff, specifically revolving politics. But Nehemia actually does answer her question about what's new. Apparently, Roland's new position that he's been assigned to in court is to basically micromanage Nehemia. Chapter 10, we are in Dorian and Kale's POV, and they're walking around together talking about how Holland is back. If you remember, Holland is Dorian's baby brother who's like a little demon child and everyone hates, but he's actually coming back to the kingdom. He's been away at like some school, I guess, but he's coming back to the kingdom because with this rebel movement that's apparently starting up, they think it's safest for him to be back in Aderlin under the king and the king's guards watch. But Holland's birthday's also coming up, so they're gonna throw this huge carnival themed party. Yay! And there's also gonna be this really big fancy dinner tonight to like celebrate his return. But Kale reveals that Celaena's not gonna be there because she's having dinner with Archer Finn. Dorian's a little confused on why she's going on a date with someone she's supposed to be killing, which rightfully so, that is a little confusing. Kale does kind of share that Celaena does know him personally and she's gonna try to see if she can coax some more information out of him about what this so-called rebel movement is and who else is a part of it. Celaena's POV getting ready for her fancy dinner. Kale is stressing because let's just say Celaena is looking fine. A little too fine for Kale's liking considering she's going on a date with another dude. But yeah, Celaena heads off on her date with Archer Finn and there's nothing Kale can do. So flash forward, we're officially on the date. And there's a lot of shameless flirting and Archer Finn asking more questions about basically what all she's been up to since they last saw each other a couple of years ago. He really just wants to know how she ended up serving the king. Like that seems to be something he's hyper fixating on. Then after their dinner, they hop into his carriage and he decides that he's gonna drop her off at the castle. As they're on their way back to the castle, he kisses her. Sir. But Celaena stops him because, fun fact, Archer Finn was an orphan. As an orphan, he was discovered to be very beautiful by a woman named Clarice. And Clarice took him in and basically forced him into the life of a courtesan. That's why he's widely known and why he has a very flirtatious demeanor. Celaena, knowing this, stops him and she's like, do you really want to live this way? Like, is this really what you want out of life? Archer Finn reveals, no, this is not what I want for my life. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I only do this because I was basically stolen off the streets as a kid and forced to live this life. And so she just looks him dead in the eyes and says, the king sent me to kill you. Chapter 11. In 0.5 seconds, this guy is on the opposite end of the carriage, armed with a dagger. He is not ready to go down, but he is ready to go down swinging. Celaena shares that the king thinks that he's a part of this rebel movement, and she gives him the same offer she gives everyone else. She says, I either need to kill you right now, or I'll allow you to stay alive if you disappear, take a whole new name and identity, never come back here again, but also feed me some more information about this quote-unquote rebel movement. And of course he decides that he's gonna feed her some information because he actually does know a little bit about a rebel movement. He doesn't know if it's the rebel movement that the king's worried about, but he knows about one, and he says that he'll give her information on that if she lets him live. So when she asks him, okay, like what's your rebel movement about? He says that there is a group of people who want to put Aelin Galathinius back on the throne. And if you're confused, that makes sense because we haven't heard this name before. Aelin Galathinius is the rightful heir to Terrasen. Only problem is she died when Aderlin conquered the Terrasen kingdom. Obviously, Celaena, who's from Terrasen, she knows the story. She knows that Aelin is dead. So she's like, what do you mean they want to put her on the throne? Like, that's not possible because she's dead and she's been dead for almost 10 years now. But Archer shares that he's been hearing a lot of whispers and there's some people who are saying that Aelin Galathinius is alive and well. And not only that, but she's raising an army, building a court, and she plans on overtaking Aderlin. Then Archer shares that a lot of the people who are a part of this Aelin Galathinius movement are actually going to be at a party tomorrow night. So there's like this masquerade party that he was invited to, and a lot of the people that he believes are a part of this movement are going to be at this party. So he says, why don't you come as my date and you can kind of scope things out. So she agrees. She's going to come with him to this party, but she warns him that if he tries anything or messes around with her and tries to give her fake information, she is going to him and rescind her offer to save his life. So we get back to the castle and Celaena shares everything with Kale. Maybe not everything, obviously she doesn't share that she's allowing him to live, but she does share that she's basically manipulating some information out of him about this rebel movement. And then she also tells him about the party that she's going to. Something interesting here, and I feel like this is where we definitely start to see a shift in how Kale views the world. He agrees with her that they shouldn't tell the king yet. Now mind you, Kale's always been like, whatever the king king wants goes, but now he seems like he's leaning more towards Selena on some of these things. So she thinks they shouldn't tell the king anything until they get more information, and he just agrees. Chapter 12, we are at the masquerade party with Selena and Archerfin. So they're walking around and Archerfin's giving her the lowdown of all the attendees there and basically reveals that the guy who's throwing this party and whose house the party is at is Davis. And he believes that Davis is actually one of the leaders of this rebel movement. She decides, I need to get into this guy's office. And Archer's like, absolutely, let me help you. So he takes her up to her office and using like a bobby pin or whatever, breaks into it because it's locked, obviously. And Selena goes in and Archer's like, they're gonna notice if we're both gone, so I need to head back downstairs. Let me know if you find anything. So he heads downstairs and Selena's looking around. She literally turns everything over. She cannot find anything. So she starts to leave, basically thinking that this is a dead end. And then she sees something out of the corner of her eye. There is a book on a bookshelf, and with gold engraving on the side, there are word marks. Obviously, that's a very big deal. We learned in book 1. So she pulls that off the shelf and she's flipping through it and she can't really understand anything in there, but there's something written in the back in the common tongue. It is only with the eye that one can see rightly. We have no idea what this means, but Selena hears footsteps, so she doesn't really have time to figure it out. She slams the book shut and puts it back. So she hears these footsteps and she decides to jump out the window, but her dress is too big that she can't get out the window. So she has to really call on her acting skills and she starts like fake sobbing. So Davis walks into the office and she is like, oh, my betrothed broke up with me, and she's all sobbing and he's like, please get out of my office. But then he asked her, how did you get in here? And she was like, oh, one of your maids just let me in so that I could have a moment alone. He's like, there's a bathroom downstairs, like get out of my office. And as she's going to walk out, he grabs her and he's like, no one else has the keys to my office except for me. And then he pulls a dagger out, and before she even has time to react, he slices up her arm. And thankfully, because she's an assassin and she's quick, she's able to grab it and like in the side of his neck. So he's no longer with us, but very quickly she starts to not feel well and she smells something very familiar. It is Gloriella. Apparently Gloriella is what she was poisoned with the night that she was taken to Endovir, so it's very much ingrained in her brain. So she knows that Gloriella is now like in her bloodstream and it's highly poisonous. Apparently it like paralyzes you and knocks you out. So she knows that she has minutes not only to get out of here, but to get back to the castle. So she literally, with the knife, she cuts off the skirts of her dress, jumps out the window, and is literally like sprinting to the castle. I guess this house is pretty close to the castle because she gets almost to the front gates, realizes that she could get in a lot of trouble if she's caught. She's supposed to be the king's assassin and no one's supposed to know that she's responsible for any of the murders. Like they're not supposed to be able to be traced back to her. So she can't actually go through the front gate and have people see her. So she realizes that the barracks are right off to the side of the front gate. So she runs in there, and I guess Kale's rooms are like right off the barracks. You learn a lot about the layout of the castle in this scene, I guess. She runs into Kale's rooms and she basically just goes, Gloriella! And then she's knocked out. Chapter 13, Kale's point of view. Selena just burst into his rooms, shouted Gloriella, dropped to the ground. She's wearing a nice dress that's covered in blood and like half the skirts are missing, and she's just there, and he's losing his mind because he really cares about her and she's paralyzed and he thinks she's probably dead. So he calls for a healer, runs to her rooms and basically tells them like, got any antidotes for Gloriella? Thankfully they do, and they're able to administer it, but they didn't know how much Gloriella she got in her system, so they gave her like a crazy ton of antidotes and she ends up like basically ODing and having to like throw it all up. It's like this whole thing. But we jump to Selena's point of view the next morning where she's waking up and Kale's sleeping on the chair next to her, and basically he wakes up and tells her like everything that went down. Then she tells him everything that went down. They decide, you know what, the king doesn't need to know about this because she could easily get fired and sent back to Endovir if he finds out how sloppy this job went. But then something really cute happens. Selena realizes in her poison-addled mind state, the only person she could think about getting to was Kale because she knew she felt safe with Kale. And she's realizing she might like Kale more than she allowed herself to originally think. Chapter 14, Selena's going back to the library for the first time since seeing that like creepy animalistic hooded creature thing, and homegirl is armed to the teeth. Like she's got every weapon on her that she could possibly have. She decides to explore the library a little bit and maybe find some answers. We get a little bit more information about about the library, because we didn't really hear much. I mean, I guess we could have assumed the library was big because they talked about millions of books or whatever. Not only is it big enough to be its own castle, but it's also 3 stories high. So imagine like crazy huge, and then on top of that times 3. Apparently in book 1, Dorian mentioned something about there being a secret library below the floor, so like a 4th secret level of the library. So Elena's wondering if that's real. So she starts exploring around the library, and she's going back to such far corners that it is like dusty, it is neglected, like clearly no one's been back to these corners of the library in a very long time. So she starts walking along the wall, and she runs into a tapestry. And if this girl's learned anything about living in this castle, is that you always want to check behind the tapestries. So she does, and sure enough, there's a secret passageway. So she decides to go in, of course, and start to explore. It's pitch black in there, but I guess there's like oil and a way to light a torch down there or something. I don't know. That part of the book always really confused me, but somehow she finds light. She's going through, and this place is clearly abandoned, like no one's been down here for the longest of times. And she's noticing that there's a lot of carvings on the wall. And as she keeps going down the hallway, and by the way, she describes like some of the faces of the carvings feel like they're watching her. And if that isn't terrifying, I don't know what is. She does, as she gets further in, she realizes that a lot of the creatures carved into the walls are actually fae. Then on top of that, she realizes she can strongly smell iron. So she follows the smell and she comes across a door, and this door is 100% iron through and through. She knows that she has not seen any other doors like this door in the castle. And then on top of that, we learn that iron is the only element entirely immune to magic. So that causes us to question, is this door meant to keep something out or to keep something in? So she starts peeking around the door, and she gets on the floor to look under the tiny crack at the bottom of the door, and she sees eyes looking back at her. The stress I get every single time reading that part, the way she did not scream her head off, I would have just thrown up right there. Like, no thank you. She books it out of there, as she should. Then we're actually gonna jump to Dorian's POV, because although his night isn't as crazy as Selena's, it's still pretty whack because he's having nightmares. I forget what the nightmare's about. I don't think it's relevant, but he basically shoots awake and he realizes his room is freezing, like to the point where he can see his breath. He's like, oh, that's weird. So he gets out of bed to like, I guess, close a window or find out why the room's freezing. And then he turns around exactly in an outline where his body was. The bed is covered in frost, as if the cold temperature is coming from him. Chapter 15. Selena later that night is at the dinner that's supposed to be like celebrating Holland's return. And she usually doesn't come to these dinners unless she's like required to for work purposes. But apparently Rena Goldsmith is going to be performing, and she's, I guess, a really popular musician that Selena really likes. And she's supposed to be like the guest performance at this fancy dinner. And this next part is honestly such like a small detail, but honestly, it's the details that matter when it comes to romance in these books. Selena is sitting at a table with Kale and all of Kale's men, and they're obviously very tense around her because they all know who she is now, and she kind of freaks them all out. And Kale can tell, and he knows that it bothers Selena that everyone's so afraid of her and is afraid to like treat her like a human being. So he starts like teasing her in front of these guys in order to show them like how personable she is. And so they start bantering, and the guys think it's funny, and so then they start talking to her and treating her more like just like one of the guys. And I think that's really sweet and intentional on Kale's end, because I feel like up until this point in the book we see him being so self-centered, so to see him stepping out of himself and thinking about Selena is nice to see. It's the bare minimum, but it's nice to see. It's showing growth. So Rena goes up to sing, and her voice is ethereal, and she's singing along with a harp and a violin, which if you ask me, that is a beautiful combination. And she sings a bunch of songs, and they're all beautiful, and everyone's very entranced by it. But she gets to the last song of the night. She starts singing a song about a fae girl and how all of these non-magical kings all sought her power for themselves. The ending something along the lines of a knight with no power who just loved her because he was a loving person, ended up being with her, and none of the kings got her magical powers. That part's not so relevant, but what is relevant is that this is very clearly a slap in the face to the royal family, who has banned magic, and the song is basically saying you ban magic because you can't have it and you can't stand that there's people out there more powerful than you. Now tell me that is not a real gutsy thing to sing in front of the king. Apparently this song is a very well-known song in Terrasen, and it reminds Selena of her childhood, and so she starts to get really emotional and she's trying not to cry because, like I said, this song being sung is crazy offensive to the royal family. Honestly, the fact that they let her sing it all the way through to me is kind of crazy, but Selena's like really moved and emotional by this, but she can't cry because she can't show that sort of emotion in front of the royal family. It would be extremely offensive and she could get in trouble. And Kale, like under the table, holds her hand and tries to like soothe and comfort her. This, I think, is the moment where I start to understand the Kale and Selena pairing. I honestly, up until this point, never saw it, but it's in this moment that I actually see it. So then we're gonna jump to Dorian's point of view because he's witnessing all of this happen, and it's really heartbreaking at first. Then it actually does, I feel like, give you a lot of relief, especially if you loved Selena and Dorian in the first book, because he has this moment where he says Selena deserves a knight in shining armor, which is exactly what Kale is, and I deserve someone who's gonna love me as much as I love them, which is a very good standard if you ask me. It literally says that Dorian closed his eyes in that moment he decided to let her go. About time. So no more love triangle. There's definitely still gonna be like feelings here and there, like Dorian can't just stop having feelings or feeling maybe a little bit betrayed by everything, but like he definitely isn't like pining for Selena anymore. So that's a nice kind of like character growth moment for Dorian. So then we're gonna jump to the king's point of view. After the last song, he takes Rena Goldsmith and the violinist and the harpist down to the dungeons, and he beheads both the violinist and the harpist. And right before Rena's beheaded, she looks the king right in the eyes and she says, "You killed everyone that I loved for having magic. So I worked my entire life to become the best musician I could be so that I could be invited to sing in your court and to sing this song to you. Basically so that you can see how everyone else sees you." And then she's murdered. Chapter 16, Selena and Nehemia are in Selena's room. And Nehemia just starts scolding Selena. She's like, "Look, I don't know how much longer I can put up with the fact that you were murdering for a corrupt man. There is no honor in that. I don't know how I can keep being friends with such a person who's not honorable." I'm really conflicted on this part personally. I try not to put too much of my personal opinion in these plot summaries, but this is something where, what do you want her to do? Go back to slave camp? I don't think it's wrong for her to say something, but I do think she's very judgmental and she comes on Selena really strong for choosing survival. Besides the point. Selena actually takes this time to tell Nehemia the truth, that she actually hasn't killed any of the people that she's been assigned to kill. She's been giving them an option out, and all of them have taken the option out. So technically, she hasn't killed a single person. And she actually shares how Archer Finn is feeding her information about this rebel movement, about getting Aelin Galathinius back up on the throne. Something weird here is that Nehemia then starts judging Archer Finn. Like, how unhonorable of him to just share all that information with you. Like, I get that people shouldn't be quick to betray other people, but he's not a part of this movement. He just has heard whispers about it. He doesn't even know if this movement's real. Selena and Nehemia decide to go down to Elena's tomb to get more answers, because Selena did tell Nehemia about the riddle she found in the back of the wordmark book, basically saying only with the eye can one see rightly or something like that. So they're looking around to see what they can discover. Selena notices something for the first time. Obviously we've known that there's like a lot of carvings and engravings on the wall all around the tomb, but they start to notice that there's a bunch of constellations like sprinkled all over the walls. There's one constellation of a stag. Now this is special because a stag is actually very symbolic of Terrasen, and this stag is very clearly like looking at something, and so they kind of trace where his eyes are going, and there is an engraving of an eye on the wall, and where the iris of the eye would be, it's completely hollow, like it's just a hole in the wall. So Selena goes up to like look into it, and sure enough there's like a wall on the other side, like she can't actually see anything. So they turn to Moore and they're like, "Sassy door knocker, like what's going on over here? Like, do you have any answers for us?" And he was like, "Ask me the right questions and I'll give you the right answers." And they're like, "Well, that's not very helpful." And he's like, "Well, that's not my problem." So I don't know. I don't know why Mort's here. Like, I truly think Mort is just here for comedic entertainment because I don't think he really provides any value to the plot, and he's definitely not helpful. This is where Selena asks for probably like the third or fourth time, I feel like, in this entire series, like, hey, will you please teach me word marks? And Nehemia actually finally agrees. They end up going back to the rooms, and luckily just in time because Philippa walks through that door like moments after they get back upstairs, and she has a letter for Selena from Archer Finn, and it's a list of names. And by names, I mean names of people who he believes to be a part of this rebel movement. Selena says, "See ya, Nehemia," and then she just decides to prance from rooftop to rooftop, stalking all the people on this list to see if anyone does anything sketchy. But she was asked to do some more guard duty at tonight's dinner, so she does have to like head back for that. Chapter 17. Selena is serving as a guard at this ballroom dinner festivity. I don't know. There's honestly so many festivities celebrating Holland being back that you kind of lose track. It's like there were 3 dinners, and then there's gonna be 2 balls, and then there's gonna be this huge birthday celebration in a couple chapters. It's this whole thing. But apparently there's like a ball going on right now, and she's supposed to stand guard. And then of course there's Dorian, who is still being absolutely attacked by all the single ladies in the court who are desperate to become his queen. Of course, he cannot get away from the dance floor because he has to dance with each one of them, and there are a lot of them. So Kale is looking around. Obviously, he's in charge of all the guards, so he's just keeping track to make sure everyone's there. But then when he gets to Selena's spot, he realizes Selena is no longer in the ballroom. Warning flags. I need to find my assassin. So he starts walking around to find her, and he turns the corner to see her dancing by herself to the music out in like the freezing cold. Selena realizes that he's been watching her, and she gets super mad, so she's just like jumping to be really argumentative, but then he just swoops in and dances with her, and so they're just dancing together, and it's really cute. This part that absolutely kills me is in the book. It says, "And Selena looked at him and she realized she was home. She has not had a home since she was 8 years old, and she feels at home with Kale." And I think that's very beautifully written on Sarah J. Maas's part, because she's like built up for the past 2 books how big of a deal it is to Selena to not have a home, but Kale's her home. So we're gonna jump to Dorian's POV. He finally gets a break from all the desperate single ladies, and he decides he's gonna walk outside for a breath of fresh air. Do you remember what's going on outside? He starts to go outside and he sees that Kale and Selena are dancing together, and he just stands there and he just dies inside a little bit. And as he is standing there staring at them, heartbroken, Nehemia does walk up. She decides she's going to start talking court politics with him because apparently Roland, who has been like assigned to micromanage her, he's apparently fighting for Calculla. If you remember, that is the prison camp that's full of Elway people. He wants to expand it and make it bigger and pack it with even more Elway people. And she's basically telling Dorian, you need to stop this. And he was like, I can't stop this. She's like, do you mean can't or won't? And that's where Dorian's like, look, you don't understand. I don't have that kind of power. But then Nehemia's response to that is actually insane. Nehemia stared at him for a long moment before nodding. You have power in you, Prince. More power than you realize. She touched his chest, tracing a symbol there too. It sleeps, she whispered, tapping his heart. In here. When the time comes, when it awakens, do not be afraid. She removed her hand and gave him a sad smile. When it is time, I will help you. And with that, she walked away. He stared after the princess, wondering what her last words meant, and why, when she said them, something ancient and slumbering deep inside of him had opened an eye. Chapter 18. Selena is just sitting in Archer Finn's townhouse waiting for him to get home, which gives her time to think about how dancing with Kale last night felt, and also how much of a disaster her first word mark lesson with Nehemia was this morning, because apparently that happened and it's not going well. So Archer Finn gets home and Selena just decides to get straight to business. Archer has 3 weeks before he gets fake murdered, and she needs way more information than he's been giving her, because names is not enough at this point. She needs actual hard proof that these people are a part of a movement, and then she needs proof of what the movement is. And Archer has 6 days to get Selena more information before she removes the deal and just unalives him. Now we're gonna jump to Dorian's point of view. There is a council meeting and they're talking about the expansion of Calculla. And while they're talking about it, Dorian notices a really small detail. Do you remember how we talked about in book 1 how both Duke Parrington and the King of Aderlin had these weird black stone rings? Apparently Roland is wearing one now. So the three of them are clearly a part of some like cult or club that no one else really knows what's going on there. But anyways, Roland is basically saying like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. Like, we're gonna expand Calicola and blah, 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 blah. Dorian speaks up. And he says, what y'all are doing is wrong. It's inhuman. And then when the people were trying to say like, oh, we're just providing a place for them to stay, like we're really doing them a favor. And then he says, I dare you to spend one night in Calcutta and tell me that's how you feel. His dad, the king, just like blows up at him. So Dorian just storms out of there. Like, he is fuming. He is so mad that he gets to his rooms and he punches the wall. Mind you, it's a stone wall. That's not very smart of him, if you ask me. Because I don't know about you, but if you ever punched a rock at full force, the rock's winning. Look at this. The rock cracks and a window a couple feet over to his right shatters. He looks at his hand. It is totally fine. No cuts, no bruises, no broken bones, nothing. And then he looks at the floor around him and there's shattered glass everywhere except for a tiny circle around him. He was protected from the glass. That is a lot to unpack in and of itself, but we're actually gonna jump to Selena and Kale's point of view for right now. They're just like talking or whatever in Kale's rooms as they usually do in the evenings, and she's like, you know what? I don't get enough sweets and I want chocolate cake. I think I deserve some chocolate cake. So he's like, fine, I'll get you some chocolate cake. And he does. They eat chocolate cake late into the night, talking, having a grand old time. And then I guess Kale falls asleep while they're talking because they talk super late. Selena starts to walk back to her room and Dorian is standing in front of her door. And she's like, are you okay? Like, he clearly doesn't seem all right. And he said that he was looking for Nehemia and he couldn't find her. And he assumed that if she wasn't in her rooms, she'd be in Selena's, but she's not. And Selena's like, dude, can I help you? Like, you don't seem okay. And he's like, no, I'm fine. And just like disappears and leaves as fast as possible. Chapter 19, we are in Kale's point of view because he is working on plans for security for the carnival that they're putting on in Holland's birthday celebration. So the king pulls Kale aside not only to talk about the security plans, but also to tell him that there's been some whisperings about a plan to hurt the Princess Nehemia. And Kale's like, oh, absolutely. Like, I'll put extra guards on her. I'll make sure nothing happens. He's like, her and Selena are pretty close. I can have Selena be one of her guards. And the king's like, absolutely not. Put as many guards on Nehemia as you want, but do not tell Selena. I don't want her knowing about this. Like, let's keep it secret from her for now. We don't really know why. And this is definitely where things take an interesting twist. And Kale's kind of in this weird point where he's like, well, should I tell Selena? Or like, the king's asking me not to, and I work for the king, but it's Selena's best friend. Shouldn't she know if her friend's being threatened? Like, she would want to know that. But Kale decides to listen to the king. He's like, you know what? Like, this is my boss. I gotta listen to him. Let's take a break from that and jump to Dorian's point of view, because he is crazy stressed and he's just trying to like spar stress away, I guess. That's like what he does when he's not in the kennels, is he spars. And Roland walks in to the barracks and offers to spar with him. Obviously, Dorian does not want to hang out with Roland. He does not like Roland, especially after what happened yesterday in the council meeting. But Roland actually tells him like, hey dude, like after what you said, I totally agreed with you. So I actually called off the vote and we didn't vote on it yesterday. I'm delaying this as much as possible. I think you're right. None of us, if we stayed there for a night, would actually claim half the stuff we're saying. Dorian's like, oh, has Roland changed maybe? And they end up doing some bonding. Like, they hang out for a good bit. They're bonding a little bit. Dorian's still wary that he's not like the best person. He is accepting the fact that maybe Roland has changed and he's not just some like bratty little kid anymore. So after they spar for a bit, he decides to go check out the area where they're setting up for the carnival. And then he runs into Kale and Selena, who I guess had the same idea. And they decide to just look around and walk around together. Dorian obviously feels closest to these two, so naturally he wants to tell them what's going on. But at the same time, a lot of signs are pointing to the fact that magic is involved. This is where it gets really dangerous. Having magic is punishable by death in this kingdom. And even though they're the people he's closest to, he as a prince has been trained his entire life not to trust anyone with anything that could affect your ability to have the crown. So they're just walking around when they come across one of the tents of sorts, and it is a fortune teller. And she has sharp iron teeth. She is an iron teeth witch. This is the first witch that we meet. Like, we've talked about them in the past, but they have not been a part of the story yet. So this is Baba Yellowlegs. Baba Yellowlegs is an iron teeth witch, which quite literally means that she's a witch and she has iron teeth. And Dorian notices off the bat, not only does she kind of freak him out, but Selena is terrified. Like, she looks like she's gonna throw up and bolt. Like, he has never seen her this terrified, except for maybe the first time she met his father. So they're like, you know what, let's head back to the castle. So they start to leave, and Dorian's like, oh, hey guys, actually let's go to the stables first. I want to show you guys something. And they're like, okay, why not? So they start walking to the stables, and there is an Asterian horse, which is basically the most expensive horse you can get. They basically say it's a horse fit for a prince. Like, it's the nicest, most pure breed. I don't know a lot about horses, but it's a really nice horse. And Dorian reveals that it is his birthday gift to Kale, whose birthday is coming up soon. And then, because I guess she had to make this moment about herself, even though it was a really special moment between Dorian and Kale, Celaena's like, I had an Asterian mare once. And they look at her and they go, how did you have an Asterian mare? She's like, oh, I stole one from a lord. Okay, still crazy, like Celaena truth bomb moment for sure, but this isn't about you, so can you just like stand off to the side and let Kale and Dorian have their moment? So Celaena says, good night, y'all have your moment, and she leaves. And she decides to go immediately and straight to the tomb of Elena because something occurred to her, I guess, in that moment in the stables. The necklace that she has, the Eye of Elena, is the perfect size to fit in the hollowed out eye engraved in the wall in Elena's tomb. Chapter 20. Celaena wakes up more and she's like, look, does this amulet, the Eye of Elena, does it have any magic powers? And he's like, absolutely, it can protect you. But that's pretty much all it does. So she goes up to the eye in the wall and she puts the amulet in there and nothing at all happens. She even tries like taking it out, putting it in backwards, upside down, forwards, on its side, whatever. Like, she tries multiple ways and nothing's working. She even tries like saying the riddle in a couple things, or even things that she's heard Elena say a couple times, and like tries to quote her and like call upon magic or whatever, and Mort's basically laughing and making fun of her. So she's like, you know what, I'm done for the night. So she goes back to her rooms and calls it a night. That night, Celaena has nightmares. She has a nightmare that she's standing in front of the frozen river that she almost died in when she was 8 years old, when Adarlan came and conquered her kingdom. And she's looking at this river and she looks up and she sees a stag on the other side of the river, which was the symbol of her home, Terrasen. And I think the stag being unattainable is representing her, like, not being able to be home, like it's far away from her and like death is in between her and her home. That's how I interpret it. But then again, that might also just be me looking into stuff way too deeply. And then she wakes up and she leaves the castle. She's like, I need to get away today. And we find out why very quickly. But we're gonna find out in Kale's point of view. He decides to come by Celaena's room, and he actually finds Nehemia there instead. And Nehemia says he is not gonna find her, and she's taken the day off, and he needs to leave her alone. And he's like, what do you mean? She can't just take the day off. Like, unless the king gives her a day off, she can't just leave. And then Nehemia informs him that it is the 10-year anniversary of Adarlan taking out Terrasen and her parents being murdered, and her almost dying and losing her home forever. If that doesn't get you a day off, I don't know what does. Chapter 21. In chapter 20, we realize that it is the 10th anniversary of the death of Celaena's parents. In chapter 21 is Celaena's POV, walking through the forest with Fleetfoot, basically just trying to properly mourn her parents, but at the same time just get away from Adarlan because they're responsible for her parents' death. So the last thing she wants to do is spend a minute of daylight in the castle. Something interesting though is that while she's walking through this forest, she's thinking more about the traumatic events that happened in her time of Endovir rather than the actual event that happened 10 years ago today. So it's later that night and she decides to go back to the castle, and Kale is waiting in her rooms for her. It's kind of a sweet little thing. Like, obviously it doesn't make everything better, but he does remember that she has this weird obsession with chocolate cake. So when she comes back to her rooms, he has a plate of chocolate cake ready for her, and something about that's just really sweet. Chapter 22, Dorian is in the library going through all of his ancestral history to basically find out if there was anyone in his lineage who has had magic in the past. All he can trace it back to is the Queen Elena, who was the Princess of Terrasen and the Queen of Adarlan over 1,000 years ago. This also causes Dorian to think about, not only because it was 10 years ago yesterday, but about Adarlan invading the Terrasen kingdom and how closely the kingdoms have been intertwined for over 1,000 years. Do you remember how Aelin Galathynius is the name that's kind of like floating around for this rebel movement? Dorian actually reveals that he knew Aelin Galathynius and they were children together. They were around the same age. He even thinks about the fact that they probably would have ended up married just because of how things went between the two kingdoms. Like, that is how closely intertwined these two kingdoms were for years. And then new character alert, I guess, we have Aedion Ashriver. He was Aelin's cousin, and he's actually still alive. He's actually a general in the king's army, the King of Adarlan. If that doesn't sound complex and complicated to you, it is. And then somewhere in all of that, his train of thought goes back to the fact that it's Kale's birthday today and he wishes he wasn't stuck in a library. He should be spending the day with Kale. But then he remembered that Celaena had a special little birthday surprise planned for him. So he's gonna let them have their day, even though that kind of kills him inside. And then he starts spiraling again because he's thinking about the fact that Kale's the one who's got the girl and he didn't get the girl. And in his moment of like frustration, a bunch of books on the bookshelves just go flying off the shelves and like explode all over the library. And he can sense that there's still some power in his blood that's about to be released. So he needs to get out of there ASAP. We're actually gonna jump to Celaena's POV, and she is preparing for Kale's surprise, and she's all nice and dressed up, and she even asked him to get all nice and dressed up, and they meet up at the castle, and they hop in a carriage, and they go to a random old apothecary. But she takes him up to the rooftop where there's this beautiful, open, like, ethereal fairy garden, basically, and there's a private dinner for two. Just for them. And this is actually really precious because Kale reveals that no one's ever really like done something for him for his birthday. Like, he's gotten gifts. Obviously Dorian just got him this fancy horse, but no one's ever like thrown a party for him. So it's a special little moment. Things are going really well. You know, they eat their food, they finish their food, and they're just gazing up at the stars. And then Celaena just decides to turn towards him and be like, so, by the way, you know how the king has been giving me names to kill? Yeah, I haven't killed any of them. Chapter 23, Kale is obviously like, hold on, what? Celaena tells him everything. Now Kale's really conflicted because if you think about it, he's all about being loyal. Like, that's his value, is loyalty. That's what he prides himself on, is how loyal he is to his kingdom. But then at the same time, he's realizing how relieved he is that she's not actually killing anyone, because that also goes against his values of honor. He's like, I don't know if I'm happy about this or if I'm absolutely spiraling because now I have to lie to the king about this too. And then Celaena reveals for the first time to us as the reader that she actually plans to run away. Like, if she ever thinks the king is about to find out or if anything goes wrong, she is out of there. And then Kale, in that moment, just tells her, I would go with you. Which is crazy coming from Kale because he gave up everything to be the captain of the guard at the palace. He literally gave up his family title, his family name. He gave up everything. Well, he still has the name Westfall, but you know what I mean. Like, he gave up his inheritance. He gave up everything to come to the castle, to be with Dorian, and to potentially serve Dorian when Dorian becomes king. And he's saying, I'm gonna leave all of that and I'm gonna go with you. Like, where you go, I will go. And then this could not have happened at a better point, but this is when Kale and Celaena have their first kiss. And it is perfect. It is exactly the way it should be. Celaena and Kale officially are together in a relationship. There's no more endless flirting where they're denying it the whole time. Like, they're actually officially an item now. But obviously they agree, like, we need to keep this a secret because this is gonna look really bad. If everything goes south, they're gonna run away together. But as soon as her time is up as an assassin for the king and she gets her freedom, either way, Kale's gonna go with her. And then something that is even more precious is, you know, the ring Kale gives Celaena in book 1? He realizes that she's still wearing it. And guys, I have to apologize. It's an amethyst ring. I don't know where I got ruby ring. I think I just got really excited. And I told y'all in my last video it was a ruby ring, but it's not. It's an amethyst ring. And I know that's a very big deal because you guys trust me to give you factual information. So I apologize. I'm sorry. Chapter 24. Let's go to Dorian's POV. He's gonna do something insanely dumb. Like, really dumb. For real. He decides that he needs answers about his power, so he's gonna go to Baba Yellowlegs, the Iron Teeth witch who's a part of the carnival. There are about 1,000 reasons why this is a horrible idea, but you know what? We can't change it. It happened, so let's just talk about it. Dorian tries to size her up and ask questions, basically to sense how legit she is and how much clairvoyance she actually has. In doing so, she talks a little bit about herself. She mentions that she's 500 years old, and don't get me wrong, like, she looks like an old lady, but she doesn't actually look 500. This is where we find out a little bit more about witches, because she shares that witches are actually half fae, half Valg, and both have very long lifespans, so we don't really know where witches get their long lifespans, probably a mix of both. But if you're like, what's Valg? That's a great question, because Valg isn't really in other fantasy worlds. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things like witches, vampires, werewolves, where you're gonna find them in most fantasy worlds, but Valg is very specific to Throne of Glass. But they're basically weird, creepy, demonic little things. We'll learn a lot more about them later, so I'm not going to harp on it too much right now. That's pretty much what they are. So Dorian asks her, is magic truly gone? And Baba Yellowlegs goes into something very interesting here. We know that magic disappeared, and she confirms, yes, magic has disappeared. Even magical creatures can no longer perform magic in Irelia. Mind you, Irelia is like the entire country that Adarlan, Eoway, Terrasen, and like all of these kingdoms were inside. Irelia is what the king of Adarlan is trying to conquer, this entire continent, right? Magic disappeared only in Irelia, apparently. There are other kingdoms on other continents that are not in Irelia who have magic, who were in Irelia when magic disappeared, went to a different continent, and now they have magic. Isn't that interesting? Baba Yellowlegs thinks it is. So Baba Yellowlegs, obviously, she kind of picks up what Dorian's putting down. Like, she's kind of smart. And she's like, listen, if someone so happened to have magic, wink, wink, she knows it's Dorian. She says if someone supposedly had magic when no one else on the entire continent did, and I wanted to figure out why that person was the exception, I would first ask myself, why did magic disappear in the first place? Based off her answer, Dorian's like, oh shoot, she's kind of picking up on the fact that I have magic, and she knows I'm the prince, and I could quite literally die if anyone finds out. So he's like, I guess you don't really understand why I'm trying to ask you. Haha, I was just messing around anyways. So then he books it and leaves. And as he's leaving, he runs into Roland, who was also kind of lurking. Dorian realizes Roland is kind of acting like he's been following him. Like, he's being kind of like a spy. But he decides not to call it out because honestly, things between him and Roland are actually getting a lot better, and he wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now we're gonna jump to Celaena's point of view. She decides to go stalk all the people on the list that Archer Finn gave her again, and they're all gone. Archer Finn tipped every single one of them off, and they and their families just left. She's livid for obvious reasons, and she debates killing him on the spot, but instead she says you have 24 hours for a whole new list of names, and then on top of that, I need actual proof and evidence of a rebel movement, not just names. Or she will actually kill him and he no longer gets a choice. This is also one of those moments where Celaena realizes that with one tip, that the king was onto this rebel movement, a whole bunch of them were able to communicate and get out of there ASAP, which means that this group is pretty organized, and it makes her wonder if this rebel movement actually has a shot. Like, if this is actually an organized group that stands a chance against the king. So we're gonna jump to later when Celaena and Nehemia are hanging out, and they're having some girl talk, and Celaena tells Nehemia all about her birthday dinner with Kale and how they're officially in a relationship, all that cutesy girl talk stuff. They're having a really great time talking about it, and then Nehemia jumps right back into politics. And she's basically just talking about how there's been more and more pressure and the king is putting more and more force on the Eoway people. And then she does something bonkers. And we're talking like treacherous. We're talking traitorous. She asks Celaena to help her to free the Eoway people and go against the king. And not just go against him, but like overtake him. Get him out of the throne. Celaena is obviously like, we could be killed just for talking about this, first of all. Second of all, no, like, that's not my place. I'm just an assassin. I'm just trying to get my freedom. What am I gonna do? You got the wrong girl. And then Nehemia brings up a good point. She was like, if you were just an assassin, why would the Queen of Elena call on you to help her. And I do think that is a really good point, because up until this moment, the Queen of Elena keeps talking about how Celaena's like chosen, it's her fate, and blah, 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 blah. And we're just kind of like, why? Like, why Celaena? Why, frankly, I wouldn't say a little nobody, because obviously she's a very notorious assassin, but like in the scheme of politics, like why her of all people? And then they end up getting in a full-fledged fight where basically Celaena says, there's no hope. I've just accepted the fact that the king is the king and he's going to overtake all the continents, and basically we just need to make the best of our current situation, not try to make things 1,000 times worse by trying to overthrow a very clearly powerful man who cannot be overthrown. And then Nehemia calls her a bunch of unsavory names and basically just says, you're a selfish coward and I want nothing to do with you. And then she leaves. Now, here's the thing. I matched with the book. What do you think? I'm gonna read chapter 25 to you because there's no way that I can reword this, and it's quite literally half a page, so bear with me. One of them has to break, the queen said to the princess. Only then can it begin. I know, said the princess, but the prince isn't ready. It has to be her. Then do you understand what I'm asking of you? Yes. Then do what needs to be done. The princess nodded and walked out of the tomb, the darkness beyond her beckoning to her, and she turned back to the queen. She won't understand. And when she goes over the edge, there will be nothing to pull her back. She will find her way back. She always does. Tears formed, but the princess blinked them away. For all of our sakes, I hope you're right. What business do Nehemia and the queen have? Something's going on. I don't like it. Chapter 26, this is in Kale's point of view, and he is a part of one of those royal council like hunting parties that they always do in those period films. And he's just kind of overseeing everything. So the king approaches Kale. Hey, I need to question Nehemia tomorrow about the threat against her life, and I'm gonna need 6 guards outside of her door. No one goes in, no one comes out. This is very important. And it's especially important that you keep it a secret, even from the assassin, Celaena. Kale really struggles with this, especially because later in the day he's hanging out with Celaena and all he wants to do is tell her, because realistically, they're best friends. And then on top of that, no one will be able to protect Nehemia better than Celaena. So they're just, you know, hanging out as they usually do. And Kale realizes something about his relationship with Celaena. Not only is he in love with her and willing to run away with her, but it occurs to him that he's thinking, even after they leave, he's thinking about marrying her, having a family with her. Like, he is in love with Celaena. He leaves her rooms and he's walking back to his rooms that night. As he's walking and daydreaming about his future with Celaena and what that would look like, he realizes that someone has snuck up behind him, but a tad too late, because they have given him the good old chloroform treatment and everything goes black. Chapter 27, Celaena's point of view. She goes to Kale's rooms. Her and Kale still go on those morning runs, and he didn't show up. She decides to go to his rooms and he's not there. So then she goes back to her room because it's about time for her word marks lesson with Nehemia, and Nehemia doesn't show up, but honestly that kind of makes sense because they got in a really gnarly fight and that's kind of how they ended things. So Celaena's not really surprised by that. So she decides to go out with the brand new list of names that Archer Finn has given her, and she decides to go stalk those people for a little bit, comes back in time for dinner, and Kale is not at dinner. So she decides to stop by his rooms again, and he is still not there. So she decides to look around, and she does actually find a letter addressed to her sitting on his desk. And it says, "We have the captain." It then has an address, and it says, "Bring no one or the captain will die." And then it says, "You have to the end of the day." And this is where we first see the killing calm. This is something that is mentioned so many times in the series whenever Celaena basically just goes like assassin sicko mode, and basically if she goes into the killing calm, you know she's about to just demolish anything in her path. We're gonna jump over to Kale's POV. He's officially waken up from his drugged stupor, and he's basically in a warehouse with a bunch of people he doesn't know, and then a bunch of other people with like hoods up so he can't see them. And then Kale realizes this is most likely the rebel movement where Celaena was kind of snooping around trying to figure out some more about it, because he overhears one of the people say she has until nightfall. So he's like, oh shoot, like Celaena's coming. He realizes it's a trap for her, but at the same time, he feels bad for these people because he knows what Celaena's capable of. And although he doesn't know what these people are capable of, he knows it will not compare. Chapter 28, Selena is armed to the teeth. Like literally everywhere on her whole assassin fit, because she put on the all black assassin fit for this. Everywhere where she could put a weapon, she has. And then she's jumping from rooftop to rooftop to get to this warehouse because, hey, they didn't say anything about coming through the front door. And then she says, when they took Kale, not only did they make the biggest mistake of their lives, but they also made the last mistake of their lives. So she drops in through the 3rd floor window and basically she just starts taking people out left and right. Literally, in Kale's point of view, he describes it as she's cutting them down like stalks of wheat. Like she's just cranking through all these people. They do not stand a chance at all. So she kills her way all the way to Kale, and then an old man steps in front of her. Like, he takes off his hood and he steps in front of her and he's asking her to stop. And he basically says, we just wanted to get an audience alone with you. Like, we're not gonna hurt you. We're not gonna hurt him. Like, that was just to get you here. Like, please stop killing everyone here. And then Archer Finn walks into the room. Obviously, I have a bone to pick with you and we'll figure that out in a second, but first things first, you're gonna release Kale. Archer Finn's not doing it. He's like, I wanna talk to you. I wanna talk to you. So Selena's like, okay, fine. You get 1 sentence to convince me not to kill you right here, right now. I have been working with Nehemia to lead these people for months. Obviously, that sentence catches Selena's attention, so she decides to hear him out. And basically, this is where we find out that the reason Nehemia came to Aderlin in the first place wasn't for diplomatic duties, although that's why the king thinks she came. She came to help organize a rebel movement against the king. And she's been doing it with Archer. Selena clearly wants proof of this, and Archer Finn points to Kale and says, well, why don't you ask Kale? He's the one who's been keeping secrets on threats to Nehemia's life, and we haven't heard from her. We brought him here because he was ordered to question Nehemia about her behavior. That's not the story we heard. We wanted to know what kind of questions he'd been commanded to ask, and we wanted you to see what sort of man he really is. Kale confesses, I knew about the anonymous threat to Nehemia's life, yes, but I was told that she'd be questioned by the king, not me. Then Archer shares that they figured that out, eventually. So he turns to Kale and says, but it's not questioning that they're going to be doing tonight, is it, Captain? Selena starts sprinting back to the castle. She would not fail Nehemia, not when there were so many awful words left between them. Selena hit the top of the stairs. The shouts behind her grew. People were calling her name, but she would stop for no one. She turned down the familiar hallway, nearly sobbing with relief at the sight of the wooden door. It was shut. She drew her 2 remaining daggers, summoning the words she needed to quickly explain to Nehemia how and where to hide. Selena would deal with the rest, and she'd enjoy it. She reached to the door and slammed into it, exploding through the locks. I don't want to read this. The world slowed to the beat of an ancient, ageless drum. Selena beheld the room. There was blood everywhere. Before the bed, Nehemia's bodyguards lay with their throat cut from ear to ear. She could hear the shouts growing closer, reaching the room, but their words were somehow muffled. Selena stood in the center of the freezing bedroom, gazing at the bed and at the princess's broken body atop of it. Nehemia was dead. I've read this book 4 times. I still hate that part. Okay, chapter 30, let's go. Selena is in total shock, obviously, and she's staring at the body, Nehemia's body, on the bed. Dorian is the first one to make it in the room, and he runs in and he sees everything, and he immediately goes to try to comfort Selena. But then Kale comes in, and then she realizes that Kale had known and did not tell her, and she could have stopped this. So she turns around and she tries to kill Kale. Many people try to pull her off of them, but Kale tells them no, like, because he's her friend, she won't hurt him. She's just upset, but she won't hurt him. And then Selena says, you will never be my friend. You have always been my enemy. And then she grabs a dagger, strikes true, except for the fact that her hand freezes an inch away from his chest, and she's unable to move for half a second before one of the guards knocks her out. Chapter 31, Dorian and Kale take Selena's unconscious body down to the dungeons, and they put her in the cell actually right next to Kaltane. And Kale confesses everything to Dorian, that they were in a relationship. He knew about a threat against Nehemia's life, how they were taken by these rebels that Selena was looking into. He tells him everything. And in doing so, Kale basically tells him that, I think your father, the king, did this. But Dorian says that's not possible because he says, when I was heading back to my rooms and I saw Selena sprinting for Nehemia's room and I started to follow her, I was coming back from dinner with my family and my father was present the entire time. It could not have been the king. So later that night, Selena wakes up from being knocked unconscious. Kaltain is enjoying the fact that Selena's down there a little too much, but Selena is not even thinking about Kaltain right now. All she can think about is the fact that her friend is dead, but something occurs to her. She knows that the king didn't do it. I think that's very interesting that she just knows this, but she does in this moment. I guess a murder, she understands that there's styles to killing and she can see patterns, and she knows that this does not match the pattern of the king's previous murders. And she would know that because he murdered her family. While she's thinking about all this, Kaltain just won't stop talking about some nonsense because Kaltain's not in her right mind anymore. Like, that's very clear. But something she says does catch Selena's ear. She mentions the fact that Duke Parrington is taking her to Morath. And that's kind of weird. We're not really sure why he's going to Morath yet, because it's kind of like out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. And then Kaltain goes back into her crazy psycho ramblings about things that don't really make sense. And she says something about the fact that her dreams are full of wings and shadows. Those two things. Like, she keeps bringing up the sound of wings and shadows. But then Selena checks back out from what Kaltain's saying, and she's remembering that the last words Nehemia said to her is, "You're nothing more than a coward." Those are not the last words you want to hear from someone, especially someone that you considered to be your best friend. This is what is sending Selena into a spiral more than anything, is that is how they ended things in their friendship. Multiple days go by. Selena has not tried to escape. She refuses to talk to anyone. And she drinks a lot of the water that they give her because the water does have a sedative in it, because they didn't really know if Selena would go through another killing calm again. So that's kind of how they've been handling it. But she's like, give me all the sedation I need. Like, she does not want to feel her feelings. She does not want to be awake to think about anything. She just wants to sleep. Kale gets to a point where he's like, okay, I think we can release her. And he does have her sent back to her rooms, heavily guarded. But as he's taking her back there and seeing how she is, he kind of realizes that he's lost her forever. And he does not have a chance at anything with her ever again. Chapter 32 is extremely short, but extremely depressing all at the same time. And it's basically just Selena trying to adapt to life without Nehemia, and she's not really. Like, she, for weeks upon weeks, just stays in her bed and does not get out of her bed. Chapter 33 is really unique because we actually have a whole new POV of a character we haven't met before. It's actually a young, nameless girl who is currently a slave at one of the EOA slave camps, Calcula. And she's working in the salt mines because it's another salt mine prison camp. And she's using one of those axes, I guess, that they use to break apart the salt. She's just working another day in the slave camp, and she hears a bunch of murmurings, and she starts to hear a bunch of wailing going throughout the camp. She's really confused, and then eventually the whispers get to her that the Princess Nehemia is dead and was killed by the king of Adarlan. And she turns towards the guard who's standing right next to her, and she murders him with her salt axe. Chapter 34. Obviously, there's going to be huge repercussions of starting an absolute violent outbreak at one of these salt mines, but we're actually not going to talk about that for whatever reason for a really long time. We're just going to jump to the next chapter. We're going to be in Kale's POV as he's talking to Ress. We haven't met Ress by name yet, but he's just one of Kale's guards. And he's basically reporting back to him about how Selena's doing, because Kale has figured for the time being it's for the best if he just doesn't go near Selena. And Kale's just basically in a tough spot because not only does he have no idea what to do about Selena, but surprisingly that's not even one of his biggest issues right now. Because of what happened in the last chapter, there's been a huge violent outbreak in Calcula, so he needs to try to help figure out what in the world they're going to do about that. And on top of that, they have to make a statement about how it wasn't the king's fault that she was assassinated. They need to figure out who in the world did assassinate her. And then, just to spice everything up a little bit more, Kale's father is coming to Adarlan. Now we're going to jump to Dorian's point of view, because two big things are bothering him. You remember how Selena had a dagger and was about to kill Kale, but then her arm was literally frozen like an inch away from killing him? That was Dorian. He doesn't know how he called upon that power, but all he knew was in the moment that Selena could not kill Kale, and somehow he stopped her arm from stabbing him. It wasn't exactly the most discreet use of magic, so he's like, no one's been talking about it, no one's asked me about it, but clearly someone had to notice. So he's a little freaked out that something might come of that. But then on top of that, his power is starting to unleash itself. And Nehemia literally told him, although he didn't realize that's what she was telling him at the time, but he's pieced it out since, that as soon as his power awakens, to come to him and she would help him. But now he can't go to her because she's dead. He has no one to go to, and now he has this absolute monster of power and he doesn't know who to talk to or what to do about it, let alone how to control it. Then we're gonna jump to Celaena's point of view. She is still reeling and grieving over Nehemia's death, but it's getting to the point of obsession with finding out who the killer is. So she's thinking over every assassin she's ever known and what their style is to kind of see what matches up. And then it occurs to her, she does know an assassin with this kind of killing style, and she's seen it before. Grave from book 1. He was one of the men in the competition to become the king's champion. Chapter 35. Celaena is leaving her rooms for the first time since Nehemia's death. So she puts on all of her assassin gear. She goes down to the tomb of Elena and Gavin, and she grabs Damaris, which is Gavin's sword. She straps it onto her back, and she decides to go hunt down Grave. He's pretty easy to find, and when she does find him, it's like he knows why she's there, so he is booking it. She's chasing him through the streets until she finally corners him in a dead-end alley. All she wants to know is who hired you. Of course, he's not being compliant, so she has to resort to some old assassin tactics to get answers. Chapter 36, this is actually in a mix of Dorian and Kale's POV as they're in one of these council meetings. They're basically debating with each other on how they're going to handle the outfall of Nehemia's death when Celaena walks in, and she is carrying Grave's head. She straight up walks to one of the men on the council, Minister Mullins or something like that, and she drops the head on the table in front of him and she says, "I think this belongs to you." And then in front of everyone says, "You shouldn't be so sloppy when ordering the assassination of such an important person. He shouldn't have picked an assassin who had obvious ties to him. I think he's actually the one who put Grave in the competition." And then on top of that, he was in possession of some of Nehemia's jewelry. And then she walks up to the king with a list of names and hands it over to him. It's a list of all the people she murdered in the warehouse when she went to rescue Kale, because technically these people were a part of the rebel movement, and they are dead, and there is actual proof of their death. So she just took advantage of that and wrote all their names on a list and gave it to the king, being like, "Hey, I found all these people a part of a rebel movement. I killed them for you." I say this is all in Kale and Dorian's point of view because we're watching this whole thing from their eyes, and they are just terrified and they are horrified and basically saying that she's unrecognizable, and she literally just looks like dead inside. Like, she is not the person they know her to be. So we're gonna actually go into Celaena's POV, but a couple hours later that day, because she is back at Archer Finn's townhouse. Basically, he just tells her that Nehemia was leading the rebel movement. Like, yeah, he helped her, but she was the face of it. We need you in her place to lead this rebel movement. And she's back at this whole, like, why me? Like, why is everyone so obsessed with me leading some sort of rebel movement? No, thank you. Like, I do not want to be a part of this. But then she does let him know that she did get justice and she did kill the person who killed Nehemia, and then tells him that he has 5 days to get out of Dodge because that's how much the king gave her to kill Archer Finn. Now we're gonna jump to Kale's POV the same night. Remember how I said his father was coming into town? Yeah, he's here, and they're having a dinner together. There's really no other way to say it. His father sucks. He's just a slimy, crusty man. There's really no other way to put it. He's just so gnarly. And I guess this is like an awkwardly silent dinner because they really have nothing to talk to each other about. It occurred to Kale, when did Celaena sneak out to kill Grave? Because he has had her room crazily heavily guarded since the death of Nehemia, although we know it's because of the secret passages, but he doesn't know that. And then I guess Kale's dad gets down to the reason why he came, and it's basically that Kale's little brother is not fit to rule in Aniel, and he basically wants Kale back, like, badly. But he's not willing to be a decent dad in order to get him back. He's just gonna continue insulting him and being a horrible father, and then acting like he owes him his life. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic, to say the least. So obviously there's nothing Kale wants less than to go back home to Aniel. Chapter 37. So Selena decides to go back to Nehemia's rooms and investigate, because clearly there's so much that Selena just didn't know about her best friend. Like, Nehemia was keeping so many secrets, and Selena's just trying to put a finger on what else she might be missing. Obviously, when she goes to the room, like, all of the blood in the actual murder scene is cleaned up, but all of Nehemia's possessions are still in her room because there's no one to come get them. So Selena starts going through her things, and of course she finds a lot of books and papers and pages just full of word marks and a bunch of things written in Ilwe as well. But Selena does see in the common tongue, it says, "Do not trust," and then she drew a symbol. It's described as looking like a mix between a wyvern and a snake. We have no idea what that means. We've never seen this symbol before. And then the eye riddle that they've been trying to solve, only with the eye can one see rightly, that one, that's also written in the back of the book. And then a couple things occur to Selena. Nehemia pretended like she had never heard the riddle before when Selena told it to her. But it occurred to her she learned the riddle from Davis. And Davis was helping lead this rebellion that Nehemia was also leading. So Nehemia knew what the riddle was the entire time. Obviously, she didn't know the answer to the riddle. There's just a lot of things that are popping up now where Selena's like, what else were you keeping from me? And then Selena has an absolute light bulb moment, and she sprints back to her rooms to go down to Gavin and Elena's tomb, because she realizes that Damaris is the answer. So the sword Damaris has like the pommel, or like the metal decal at the bottom that's on the handle, and there is an eye on it. And the hollow eye on Damaris matches the eye in the wall. So she goes and she holds the sword up to the wall, and she looks through it, and sure enough, there is a poem written on the wall that you can only see when the two are lined up perfectly. By the Valg 3 were made, of the gate stone of the word. Obsidian the gods forbade, and stone they greatly feared. In grief he hid one in the crown of her he loved so well, to keep with her where she lay down inside the starry cell. The second one was hidden in a mountain made of fire. There all men were forbidden, despite their great desires. Where the third lies will never be told by voice or tongue or sum of gold. A lot to unpack there. So this poem is about 3 things, and 3 very important things, but 3 what? And why are they important? And what do they even do? So by the Valg, which is like the first phrase. Remember, Valg is what the witches are half made of. They're half Valg, half Fae. So that's that weird, like, creepy demonic thing that we talked about that we don't really know much about yet. Then Selena realizes the obsidian stone, the king, Harrington, and Roland, and what used to be Cain, they all have obsidian blackstone rings. She realizes more about the poem as we go, but that's just like some of her initial observations. And then obviously the mountain made of fire, she's like, okay, that's clearly a volcano, but there's none of those in Irelia, so I don't really know where to go with that one. And so naturally she turns to Mor and she's asking him some questions about the riddle, and of course he's being sassy and giving a lot of non-answers and refusing to say anything. And then he mentions something about Nehemia and about a time that she was down in the tomb. And he's specifically talking about the night that Selena was attacked by a Ridderak. And then it occurs to Selena that she did not show Nehemia the tombs until after that. Yet Nehemia acted like she didn't know that they were there. She acted surprised, and she acted like it was her first time seeing everything, when in reality she'd been down there before. Yet again, more lies about Nehemia. It also kind of sucks because she literally just died such a horrible and brutal death, and so the last thing you want to realize about her is that she might not be this perfect person that you thought she was. But in all reality, like, this is really frustrating, and Selena really needs to know answers to these things. And it's like, if they had worked together before Nehemia had died, they might have actually gotten answers, but instead Nehemia let her think that she was alone in all of this. And so after talking with Mor and after piecing together a lot of things, she realizes that Nehemia was looking for these 3 things, and the locations described in the riddle could clearly be anywhere. So it occurs to Selena that Nehemia was looking for whatever these 3 things were. Kind of in this moment that Selena decides, you know what, if Nehemia was willing to die looking for these 3 things, I'm gonna find them for her, like in her honor, I guess. But then it occurs to her that in order to even find them, she can't stay in Irelia, but the king will never let her leave. Unless for whatever reason he needed her to assassinate someone in an entirely different country, which doesn't really seem like it's the case right now since he's so obsessed with this rebel movement. She's trying to brainstorm basically how to figure this out once she's stuck in the castle. And then it occurs to her that she can't even trust Kale anymore, so she doesn't even know who to go to anymore, because Nehemia was her person. And then the Queen of Elena shows up. Finally, she's been nowhere to be found when we've needed her most. Although I am frustrated with the Queen Elena, and when she chooses to show up and not, she does thankfully tell Selena that Nehemia did not feel any of the pain. She's now in a safe place, and that she wasn't afraid when she was murdered, that she was strong up until the end. So this does give Selena some healing that I think she definitely needed. I really do think it's because of this moment that Selena does decide that night that she's finally ready to bestow the last honor she can on Nehemia and visit her tomb. Now we're gonna jump to Kale's POV, because he notices that Selena's leaving the castle and he decides to follow her. And then he realizes that he followed her to Nehemia's tomb. He clearly recognizes that this is a very intimate moment. It's very private, and he definitely should not be here, and he needs to give her some space. So he decides that he's going to leave. But right as he's about to leave, Selena does something very interesting and unexpected. She starts to sing, and not just like sing a pretty song. Like, it's actually described as being not very beautiful sounding at all, and it's like a lament, like a funeral dirge. But the thing is it's not in a language that Kale recognizes. It doesn't even sound like the language of Terrasen. It sounds like an ancient language. And he's absolutely entranced and confused, and he's listening to her sing this entire song, and then she just stops and turns and sees him. And they're just like standing there looking at each other. I don't know, if I were him and if it was late at night and this chick just tried to kill me like a month ago, and she's looking at me like that in the dark after I just witnessed a moment I should not have witnessed, I would be deathly afraid that I would be dead in 5 seconds. But she just looks at him and then she walks away. Chapter 38. Elena's gonna go to the library, but she runs into Dorian, who's in the library. She doesn't know, but at the time he's actually looking for more on magic to see what he can find about what kind of magic he even has. When Selena comes in, so he kind of closes the books and puts it off to the side. He's kind of walking on glass around her because he's trying to feel out, like, is she okay? This is the first time really talking to her since Nehemia died. This is also the first time he's seen her outside of her death, when she wasn't like in full-blown 110% assassin mode, carrying the head of another assassin. But she's surprisingly normal, and they end up hitting it off and laughing and talking, and he basically says it felt like the old days again. Now we're gonna jump to Kale's POV, because Kale is just trying to get away from his father, but then he's also just trying to get away from his men right now and find some time alone, and he knows he's not gonna find any of them in the library. But who he does find in the library is Dorian and Kale just laughing it up, having a good time. So he goes to the librarian and he asks her if they have any books on funeral laments or dirges sung at Terrasen funerals. And the librarian says that no, like they weren't even written down because they were just passed on through the culture. Unfortunately, that culture is gone now. Unfortunately, because the kingdom was conquered, like people don't really know their songs anymore. So Kale is like, well, it might not have been the Terrasen language because it sounded so foreign to him. So he's like, what about any language? Like any ancient languages? Like, do you have any books on any dirges or funeral songs? And then the guy shares with him and he's like, you know what? I don't really have any books like that, but it's interesting you say ancient languages because technically in Terrasen, I did attend a funeral once years and years ago, and they actually did sing a funeral dirge in the ancient language, the language of the Fae. And then it hits Kale. And this is where stuff starts getting good in this book. What did she say to him when she almost murdered him? You will always be my enemy. That was a very interesting choice of words. Her parents were slaughtered by the king. That is not a treatment that any Terrasen citizen would receive, which means that Selena had to be of noble heritage. Her parents had to be one of the noble families of Terrasen, which means that if Terrasen ever got back on its feet and Selena, being the absolute powerhouse that she is, decided to join them, it would be over. Chapter 39, Selena is on the rooftops watching Archer Finn, as she does in her assassin stalky way, and she notices a lot of rebels coming in and out of his townhouse, and most all of them she recognizes because she's been stalking all of them for over a month now. But there's one that she actually doesn't recognize at all, and he's a cloaked figure, so she's a little confused because she cannot identify this person. And she does actually debate following them, but she decides that she just does not care anymore. Her main goal now is to find whatever these 3 random things are that Nehemia was looking for before she got killed. So in the library earlier that day, Dorian did invite her to dinner in his rooms, and so she decided to take him up on it. So after she's done stalking Archer, she comes back to the castle in time for dinner and stops by Dorian's room, which is surprisingly very humble. Like, it's very big, but it's not super ornately decorated, and he doesn't really let the servants come in and clean it all the time. And she just realizes it makes her like him more. Most people just assume he's like a very stuck-up prince and that he's going to be like his father, but she realizes that there are just so many things about him that point to the opposite. And they just have a good night talking, and she does end up like talking on his couch with him for a long time and ends up falling asleep. And there's like this really sad moment where Dorian realizes that she hadn't seen his rooms before Nehemia's death. And so it's probably the only place in the entire castle that she doesn't have associated memories with Nehemia. So he basically just makes a mental note to invite her over and let her know that she can come whenever she wants to be there. And that's just a really sweet friendship moment. I love that for them. The next day, Selena is back in the tomb and she's basically trying to figure out the riddle again. Mort is being absolutely no help. The Queen of Elena is nowhere to be found. And then it occurs to her that she needs to talk to someone. Perhaps someone who's like 500 years old with clairvoyance. She decides that she's going to talk with Baba Yellowlegs. Chapter 40. Selena realized that maybe her best chance of getting an answer to the riddle is someone with clairvoyance. And who do we know who claims to have clairvoyance? Baba Yellowlegs. So the carnival's actually wrapping up, so she has to go down and try to catch Baba at her wagon before she heads out of town. This is hot tea. It will burn you if you try to drink it. And I'm not neglecting you. I'm just talking to someone else. Have a kiss. Thank you. That was very sweet. So we go to Baba Yellowlegs' wagon. I find it really interesting that the first thing that Baba Yellowlegs says to Selena as she's walking up to the wagon is, "Done running away from fate, are we?" Interesting choice of words. Ow, don't bite me. That's not nice. So Selena offers 3 coins for her services, and the witch is like, absolutely not. I want more. So Selena's like, you know what? This is not worth my time. So she starts to leave, but then the witch says, Prince Dorian was willing to pay 4 coins. And then Baba says, if you're willing to give me more, I'll answer your questions as well as tell you what Dorian was asking. First of all, Selena's like, Dorian, you are so dumb. Why? Because clearly, obviously, these are like very secret. Selena doesn't know what Dorian was asking, but she knows it can't be good if Baba's willing to sell the prince's secrets. So she's willing to pay her extra, not only to get her answers, but also for Dorian's questions. Later, we do find out that she's not trying to figure them out. She's basically paying for Baba's silence on the prince's secrets. So more honorable than you think. So they go into the wagon and it's this maze of mirrors. And it's not just like your typical carnival maze of mirrors. Like off the bat, she knows magic is involved because there's no humanly possible way that this is actually like in the vicinity of the wagon that she saw. So Selena decides to take the casual approach. She says that me and my buddies found this riddle and we have a bet on who can answer it first. Baba reads the riddle and she's instantly tense. This information is not for idle games of mortals. But when Selena asks how much it would cost to get the information, Baba says something really interesting. And I want you to put this in your brain and lock it away for like multiple books later. But just remember this. Nameless is my price. Once you know this, there is no unknowing it. And this response is honestly so huge and it sets the precedence for like the rest of the book. So I'm just going to read it from Sarah J. Maas's word herself. Obviously, I took the liberties of shortening it. The word governs and forms the foundations of this world, not just Irelia, the whole continent, but all life. There are worlds that exist beyond your knowledge, worlds that lie on top of each other and don't know it. Right now, you could be standing on the bottom of someone else's ocean. The word keeps these realms apart. There are gates, black areas in the word that allow for life to pass through the worlds. There are word gates that lead to Aurelia. All sorts of beings come through them. benign things, but also the dead and foul things that creep in when the gods are looking elsewhere. But long ago, before humans overran this miserable world, a different sort of evil broke through the gates. The Valg. Remember, Valg is what witches are made of. Witches are half Valg and half Fae. Demons from another realm, bent on the conquest of Aurelia. And with the force of endless armies behind them, in Wendelin they fought against the Fae. Try as the immortal children might, they could not defeat them. Then the Fae learned that the Valg had done something unforgivable. They had taken a piece of the word gate with their dark magic and split it into 3 slivers, 3 keys, 1 key for each of their 3 kings. Using all 3 at once, the Valg kings were able to open that word gate at will, to manipulate its power to strengthen their forces, to allow an endless line of soldiers to pour into the world. The Fae knew they must stop it. But the word keys were indeed retrieved, and the Fae Queen Maeve banished the Valg to their realm. And yet, for all her wisdom, Maeve could not discover how to put the keys back in the word gate, and no forge, no steel, no weight could destroy them. So Maeve, believing that no one could have their power, sent them across the sea with Brannon Galathinius, the first king of Terrasen. Okay, we're not done yet, but there's just a lot. To hide on this continent, Aurelia. And thus the word gate remained protected, its power unused. So the riddle is a map to where these keys are hidden, Selena asked, trembling now. She realized just the kind of power that Nahimi and the others had been after. Worse, what the king is after. And then Yellowlegs confirms. Selena asked, what might one do with the word keys? In her response, listen to this. The person who holds all 3 word keys would have control over the broken word gate and all of Aurelia. They would be able to open and close the gate at will. They could conquer new worlds or let in all sorts of life to bend to their cause. But even 1 key could make someone immensely dangerous. Not enough power to open a gate, but enough to be a threat. You see, the keys themselves are pure power, power to be shaped as the yielder wills it. Tempting, isn't it? Okay. Basically, in summary, we find out that this riddle is a map to the 3 word keys. And the word keys are basically 3 keys to this gate. So each of these keys is like a third of the big key to the gate. But then she says that whoever has the keys has a crazy ton of power. Who has a ton of unexplainable power right now that can't be explained when there's no magic? The king. Him and Parrington have been talking about this power that they've been using. So it occurs to Selena that the king has at least one of these word keys. And here's where it gets interesting. She now has access to the riddle, and she knows a lot about these word keys, which means that Baba now has way too much information, and Selena's like, I gotta kill this witch. So Selena goes to make the first blow, but Baba Yellowlegs, who may be old, but she is supernatural, beats her to the first punch and knocks her down on the floor. Chapter 41, Kale makes a list of every single possible noble family Selena could be from. Because remember, Kale now realizes Selena may pack way more power in her punch. She may actually be from a noble Terrasen line. And I guess he's talking with Dorian in this moment and basically trying to decide whether or not he should tell Dorian, because if he's correct, which he's convinced that he is, she could be a huge threat to Dorian. We're gonna jump to Selena's POV because she's still brawling with this witch. And then she remembers somehow, somewhere, she learned that the only way to kill a witch is to cut off its head. So that's exactly what she does to Baba Yellowlegs. Except Baba goes down swinging and she leaves what's described as a necklace of scars on Selena's neck. Chapter 42, Selena goes back down to the tombs to see what else she can find out about word marks now that she has a little more context for the poem. And Mort sees the scars and he's like, you just branded yourself a witch killer. Which, mind you, I don't know if this is a loophole in the series, but literally in book 1, like within the first 5 chapters, we learn that Selena has killed a witch before. So I don't know why it's all of a sudden a really big deal that she's a witch killer. If any of y'all have an answer to that and I'm just missing something, put it down in the comments because I'm actually very curious. But I guess it is kind of a bigger deal now because Baba Yellowlegs wasn't just any old witch. She was actually the queen to a witch clan. So Mort tells her, he's like, when the time comes, you're gonna have to pay for that. And I guess we're gonna find out what that time is eventually, but not right now. We're gonna go back to Kale's POV because it is killing him. Like he needs to know. He is obsessed with finding out what noble family she is from. So he sneaks into her rooms when she's not in there and he's looking through all her stuff and he finds her will. She had written up a will, I think it's like 2 days before Nehemiah's death, and she left everything to Kale. Obviously, the day Nehemiah died, every single feeling that Celaena had towards Kale completely went away. Like, they were planning on running away together, living their happily ever after together, and now she wishes he was dead. So you could say there's been a shift in the relationship. So the fact that everything in her will is left to him is actually kind of insane. As we know, Celaena's in the tomb, so she sneaks back up through the secret doorway and is back in her room, and Kale turns around, obviously having no clue how in the world she got back into the room. I think he just assumes that she was in the room the whole time and he just missed it somehow. He just kind of looks at her like, what are you gonna do? Like, if I were him, I would be afraid to be in a room alone with her. I would fear for my life. I think that's how he feels in this moment. And she just looks at him and she's like, I'm not gonna change it. Like, you still get everything if I die. And this just breaks Kale's heart. It basically is just shoving in his face everything he could have had if he didn't put his loyalty to the king above his loyalty to the love of his life. And this is the moment where Kale's heart just breaks, because I feel like it just shows him everything that he's missing out on, all because he chose to be loyal to a corrupt king over the love of his life. Chapter 43. Celaena is going down to the iron door in the secret underground library in the castle. Honestly, it's kind of confusing to me because I'm pretty sure she only had a couple lessons with Nehemiah on word marks before Nehemiah died. All they ever talked about was how disastrous those lessons went, but apparently Celaena knows enough to actually use them now. I don't know how instructive that Walking Dead book is, but instructive enough apparently for her to go down and use the word marks to unlock the iron door. Because I'll remind you that although magic doesn't work in all of Irelia, word marks do. It's like one of the very few, obviously besides word keys. So word keys and word marks are the only kinds of power and magic that actually work in all of Irelia right now. Ooh, I'm getting raspy. Okay, so she unlocks the iron door and she's walking through, and it is a long hallway with doors on either side of the hallway, and all of the doors are numbered 1 to 100. The doors have no handles, and when she looks inside, she realizes like these are dungeon prison cells. You know, like the stereotype like in a prison where people put markers for like how many days they've been in there. She keeps seeing those on the walls, but they're made with fingernails. That's gross. You're being so good while Mommy's recording. I love you for that. So she walks all the way down the corridor, and I don't know what kind of bravery is in this girl's blood to actually walk all the way down there. Honestly, the fact that she went all the way down there and unlocked the door after seeing eyes underneath the door to me is just insane. But she not only unlocks the door and goes in and takes a look around, but she walks all the way down the hallway past like 50 doors worth on either side. And she gets to door 100, which is like right at the end. And when she opens it, there's a spiral staircase, and she can either go up or down. And right as she's about to decide whether or not to go up or down, she realizes, like to one of the doors on either side of her, that the door had been smashed from the inside. One could argue that these are more cages than dungeon cells. So she decides to go all the way up the spiral staircase, and she realizes a lot of black stone. And it's the same exact stone that she's noticed is in the King, Harrington, and Roland's ring. And I guess the ring that Kane used to have. And then she realizes she is in the Black Stone Tower. Chapter 44. Dorian is in the library, and he notices Celaena walking through the library. So he decides to follow her, and then he sees her lift a tapestry and go through a secret doorway. So he follows her down the secret doorway, and then he sees her go to this iron door and unlock it. Dorian has been following her the entire time, and now he is also in these dungeon cells, realizing what kind of monstrosities are in his father's castle. But he doesn't actually go to like the spiral staircase part that Celaena goes to. Like he actually, I don't even think he goes down the hallway. Like he stays by the iron door, and he decides he's gonna wait for Celaena to come back because he's got the spooks. And honestly, I don't blame him. I have the spooks just reading this part. We're gonna jump back to Celaena's POV because her amulet starts glowing. Listen, what do we know about when her amulet starts glowing? It means that there's danger, because the only power the necklace has is to protect. So if it's glowing, it's trying to protect her from something. She has this moment where she like her assassin sixth sense, I guess, but she knows she's not alone. And then she hears nails scraping along the stone walls. And then she hears hissing. It is the same hissing that she heard at the beginning of this book when she saw that animalistic hooded creature in the library. Yeah, It's that thing. She whips around, and thankfully she was smart enough and she brought Damaris. So she whips Damaris from behind her back and she goes to like slash at this creature. And the crazy thing is that she hits it, but it's totally unaffected. So whatever this thing is not affected by mortal steel. And this thing, it is animalistic, it has supernatural strength, like it is so inhuman. But as they're fighting, his hood kind of falls back and she realizes that it actually is a man. But he's not a man anymore. Like, he is a man that has been stripped of all of his humanity and been turned into some animalistic beast. And it occurs to her that if she saw this thing in and out of the library, that means it knows word marks. So not only can they not keep it detained down in the dungeon, but her sword can't defeat it. So the only thing she can do is run, and run she does. And while sprinting out, she runs into Dorian, and she's like, you know, we don't really have time for questions right now, but you and I are gonna have a lot of talking to do as soon as we're out of here. So they make it back to the door and they swing it shut, and they're both trying to hold the door. Dorian, as we have learned, whenever he's in a high stress or high emotional situation, what happens? His magic unleashes. And that's exactly what happens here. His magic unleashes at the door, and Celaena's like, that's new. So I guess she left the Walking Dead book like near the iron door, which honestly, thank goodness, because she could really use it right now. So she has Dorian grab it and turn to a binding spell page, and she uses word marks and she does a whole binding spell, and the creature is bound behind the door temporarily. That debacle's all done, and Celaena turns to Dorian and she says, do you want to explain yourself first, or should I? Because I guess they both have a lot of explaining to do. First of all, 1, what was that? 2, how does she know word marks? 3, why was she down there in the first place? And why did Dorian follow her? And why does Dorian have magic? Like, they both have a lot of explaining to do on either end. Also, she needs to know what in the world he said to the witch, but I think she's kind of already picked up on what that might be. So he actually decides to explain himself first, and she has a lot of questions. And the first one she thinks to ask is, why do you have magic and no one else does? Because remember, we find out in book 1 that Celaena actually had magic before magic disappeared. So I feel like that's a fair question for her to ask. Like, why do you have magic but I lost mine? And he just basically reveals he doesn't know. He's been trying to figure that out himself. He even tells her about the night that she went to kill Dorian. He's actually the only reason that her blade did not strike true. She just straight up looks at him and she goes, I knew magic was involved, I just didn't know it was you. And then he just lets her know that no one knows, not even Kale, who he tells everything to. So it's really just her keeping his secret. And they decide, you know what, we're just gonna take everything day by day and we are gonna look out for each other. Chapter 45, Celaena goes down to visit Kaltain in her cell. But Kaltain is actually gone. And there had clearly been a struggle. And the only thing that was left in her cell was actually the cloak that Celaena gave to her to try to keep her warm when she was down there. A guard shares that she was taken to Morath with Parrington. Also, let me just help you draw a connection here real quick, and it's not really a spoiler because Celaena does kind of draw it too. Both Kaltain and Roland were taken to Morath with Parrington. Both of them complained about having a lot of headaches and hearing the sound of wings. I'm not going to tell you what it actually is, but it's not a coincidence. Chapter 46, Celaena goes down to the tomb because she knew that the tomb had to have more answers than just that riddle. And then it occurs to her, which honestly, I don't know why it did. To me, it's kind of like the riddle in ACOTAR. Like, some people totally catch on to it and some people totally don't. The beginning of the riddle explaining where the word keys are was very clearly trying to point towards Queen Elena, the first princess of Terrasen. But Celaena just figured it out. And then she realizes it's in the Eye of Elena, the necklace, the amulet she's been carrying around. So I guess she can take it apart. I mean, all the fan art I have found, the necklace looks a lot like this, but apparently in the book she's able to take it apart and it's hollow on the inside, and she realizes that whatever word key was in this necklace is clearly now gone. And then Mort reveals that that is the word key that the king found, and he actually found it when he was a prince down in this very tomb. And in this moment, I guess Celaena decides, you know what, I don't think the king just has one word key, I think he has 2 of the 3 word keys. And then it also occurs to her that he used the word keys to get rid of magic, because it was right about the time that Mort said he found the first word key that magic disappeared from all of Aurelia, which would explain why only the king and Dorian have power. And then she realizes another crazy thing. Cain was using word mark portals to summon the Riderack. which means that using the word marks, Selena can also summon portals. And then she has this brilliant idea, which is actually quite dumb, and she decides that she's going to use a word mark portal to summon Nehemia. We're gonna jump to Dorian's point of view though, because right now he is having a dream and a man comes up to him and says that his friend is in trouble. He said, go to Selena's rooms, there is a secret passage behind a tapestry, go down the stairs and through the third door and find her or you're gonna lose her forever. Wake up. And so Dorian wakes up and he was like, what in the world was that? And he realizes that the man in his dream was none other than King Gavin. So Dorian questions nothing and he is going straight to Selena's rooms. Chapter 47. Selena has Fleetfoot with her for some reason. I think it's because Fleetfoot really misses Nehemia. There's multiple points in certain chapters where Fleetfoot is like waiting for Nehemia or gets all whimpery and whiny when Nehemia is supposed to like be there. So she brings Fleetfoot, she makes all the necessary markings, and she summons a portal. And she realizes that she really needs to talk to Nehemia because the last word she ever said to her is, you are nothing more than a coward. And Selena does not want that to be their last interaction. So she's summoning Nehemia basically so they can make things right between them, but also to try to get some answers about these word keys. So surprisingly, the spirit of Nehemia does show up through this portal and Selena just apologizes. Like she instantly just jumps into apologizing for the way they ended things, how she wasn't there to save her, how she could have saved her, blah, 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 blah. But Nehemia's like, listen, do not open this portal again or someone else is going to answer your call and you will not survive the encounter. Whoa, okay, like that's intense, that's a lot. But before Selena can even process that, Nehemia then says that my death set things in motion, things that needed to happen. And then she just straight up disappears. And then Selena hears something, turns around, and who else is standing behind her than Archer Finn? Chapter 48. Archer Finn reveals that Nehemia showed him the passages, and he's been using them to keep a close eye on Selena since Nehemia's death. So Selena's armed and she's deciding whether or not she can trust him. She really just doesn't know what to do in this moment. And he puts his hands up to show like, hey, look, like I'm not armed, I'm not gonna hurt you. But when he does, his sleeve falls down and it reveals a very interesting looking tattoo, which she has seen before. Do you remember when Selena was going through Nehemia's things, amidst a bunch of writings in Eelway and in word marks, there was something in the common tongue that said, do not trust, and then she drew a symbol? The symbol is Archer's tattoo. Nehemia was trying to tell Selena in a secret way not to trust Archer Finn. This is where it gets even crazier. Archer Finn reveals that him and Nehemia were trying to find the word marks together. And he wants to know more, but unfortunately at this point Selena knows as much as he does. So he wants to team up together to see what they can find out. But unfortunately for Archer, he accidentally slips up. Because Nehemia apparently was very clear that she wanted to find the word keys and destroy them. Archer Finn accidentally lets slip that he wants to find the word keys and use them. He thinks he's going to use them for the greater good, but frankly, you can't use an evil weapon for good. Selena realizes that the only way she's going to get more information out of this guy is if she pretends she's on board. So she starts to play the role of like, oh yeah, so like what could we do you think with that unlimited power? What would that look like? A partnership between the two of us. And then this is where it gets absolutely bonkers. And honestly, this is one of those moments where the first time I read this book, I had to like physically put the book down and process what I just read, because he reveals that although Grave did kill Nehemia, Minister Mullins was not the one who hired Grave. Archer Finn was. Archer Finn ordered Nehemia's death. He's the one who made the anonymous threat. He's the one who took a bet on the fact that Kale was not going to tell Selena. And at this point, Selena's like, you know what? I've heard everything I need to hear. I'm going to kill you. So that's exactly what she does, or tries to do. Unfortunately, she's not successful because in the chaos of all of this, for some reason, they forgot about the fact that there's literally a portal to the underworld open and just sitting there. Even after Nehemia just warned her, like, hey, you're not gonna like the kind of things that come through this portal, she leaves it open during this entire conversation. So she's about to kill Archer, and then something comes out of the portal, and it's not Nehemia. We're gonna jump to Kale's POV for a second because Dorian comes bursting into his rooms and just says, she's in trouble, we need to go. Kale doesn't even question it. He knows exactly who he's talking about. So they're running to Selena's room in a full-on sprint. And he's like, what do you mean? Give me more context. What am I walking into right now? And Dorian just says, look, I know it sounds crazy, but I had a dream and they said that Selena's in trouble and that there's a secret door in her room and we need to go through it and we need to get to her or she's gonna die. And Kale, honestly, in this moment's like, I think you're kind of crazy. I don't know if I believe you. I know for a fact there's not a secret doorway in her room, but you know what? You seem really stressed out about this and I'm gonna be a good friend, so I'm just gonna go along for the ride. So they get to her rooms and the doors are locked. So Kale just breaks this door down in just a second. And sure enough, he watches Dorian go straight to this tapestry, pull it back, and there's a secret door. Kale in this moment is like, so many things become apparent to him. He starts thinking of all the times that Selena ended up not being in her rooms when she was supposed to be, and the guards knew nothing about it. Honestly, I just feel so bad for all the guards who probably got in trouble for all the nights that Selena was able to sneak past them, but in reality, she was just using a secret door. So Kale realizes at this point, you know what, Dorian, I believe everything that dude said to you in your dream, so let's go get Selena right now. So they sprint down these dusty stairs, they take the third door on the right, they go through, and they walk into a sight to behold. They see Selena knocked out on the floor, Archer standing over her with a book chanting really weird ancient languages. Fleetfoot is going berserk, barking at a portal, but when they look at the portal, they see a literal monster, like just standing in this portal. Chapter 49. Because Kale is a man of action, the first thing he does is he launches for that monster. And because Dorian's more of a tender, caring person, he goes straight for Selena to make sure that she's okay. Honestly, I feel like that works great. Like, they both know their roles in the scenario and they both hop into action, so I'm not mad about it. Selena actually wakes up and Dorian immediately goes to start to fight the monster. And I don't know at what point Dorian started to be able to control his magic like this, but he's able to start, like, making blows at this monster with his magic. And Kale has a moment of like, wait, when, who, why, what's happening right now? Kale is honestly having his whole world blown to bits right now, and everything he believes and thought he knew is just kind of like shattering right now, but he's still fighting this monster. His best friend is next to him, illegally doing magic, and in the chaos of all this, Archer takes the book and he just books it. And that book was their only chance of closing the portal. So Kale and Dorian just grab Selena and they're like, we need to go and get out of here. So they start to go back through the door to go up the stairs to leave, but Fleetfoot decides to be a protective doggo and attack the monster, and ends up running straight into the portal. Now, Selena is not letting her dog go anywhere, let alone into a portal that's clearly full of a world of these insane monsters. So Selena rips herself from both Kale and Dorian's grasp, and she runs into the portal for her dog. Kale is immediately running after her too, but this is where the bonkers stuff happens. Selena runs through the portal, and Kale watches Selena shift from human to fae. Chapter 50, we're in Selena's POV, and she's realized that she has shifted, and that she has shifted in front of Kale. Selena has not shifted into her fae form in 10 years, so it is one of the most excruciating pains that she's experienced in a long time. And she realizes her secret is out, that she is fae. Let's just take a minute and let that sink in. Okay. So she is in the portal in her fae form with the Damaris sword, fighting this monster to basically leave her dog alone. And I don't know where she got this idea, but she realizes that Damaris was super powerful and known for literally slaying evil creatures. So she decides to take a stab at it, and quite literally, she takes a stab at the earth. She plunges the sword down into the ground. It doesn't kill all the monsters, but the world literally starts crumbling and falling apart. So Kale reaches into the portal, grabs her by the arm, and somehow I guess grabbed Fleetfoot as well. And he pulls them back in, and she immediately pops back into her human form because remember, there's no magic. And if you're confused about why that's a thing, you actually get answers for that in the next book, so don't worry about it. Thankfully though, Dorian, for whatever reason, did not see the shift happen, and both Kale and Selena know that Dorian didn't see it. So they're just kind of looking at each other, and Kale obviously looks like he has seen a ghost, or in this case, a fae. And I feel bad because Dorian thinks it's because of him, but it's really because he's just found out that his two only friends in the world, one of them's actually a fae creature, and the other one has magic. In his entire life, he's been an absolute purist about how magic is evil, but then the two people he cares about most in life now have magic and like extremely powerful raw forms of it. I'm not going to pretend to understand this part, but basically she goes to the word marks that she drew on the ground in order to summon the portal in the first place, and she like messes them up on purpose, so it ends up like getting rid of the portal. So the portal's gone. Don't know why we didn't do that first thing. But it's done now, so it's fine. And they decide, you know what, we've all got cuts, bruises, and scratches, and they look pretty rough. So they're gonna go actually down to the infirmary and see a healer. Kale says, all right, but we're doing healers. We're all having a very strong drink. And then both of you have a lot of explaining to do, and I have a lot of questions. And they all agree, you know what, yep, that works. But as they start to head up the stairs, Selena realizes Archer cannot have gotten far, because I guess she like injured his leg or something. So she once again rips herself from the grasp of both of these men, and she books it down the passageway to follow after Archer. Chapter 51. She of course catches up to Archer, and right as she's about to kill him, she remembers something that Nehemia said to her. Basically before her death, there was a conversation they had where Nehemia said, despite all the horrible and dark things that have happened in your life, you have a light inside of you, and whatever you do, I don't want you to lose that light. And Selena's holding these words to her heart. So she's going to kill Archer, and she's like, you know what? I can't let that light go out. So she's like, you know what? I'm gonna let you live. But then she sees in his eyes, he's feeling really smug about that. Like, he just won. And then Selena decides, you know what? Nehemia was a good woman. Unfortunately, I am not. So she does what she does best. Chapter 52. Selena just got done making Archer regret ever living in the first place, and she probably does her best work yet to date. And then she turns around and Kale is standing at the end of the passageway, and he watched her the whole time revel in probably one of the goriest, most monstrous assassinations that she's ever committed. But honestly, Selena's totally unaffected at this point. Kale knows she's Fae, and she's like, you know what? I can't make things any worse. Like, you already hate me, you already think I'm a monster, so let's just pretend this never happened and go back to the castle. So they walk back and they go to the infirmary. Once again, Dorian did not witness this, so I feel like poor Dorian is just so out of the loop right now on why everyone's so crazy tense. And while they're with the healer, which by the way, they ask her to keep everything private, and she's like a younger healer. She's not like the head healer. You'll get to know her a little bit more in the next book. Basically, she agrees to keep everything secret, and they start talking about what in the world happened. After they're done being treated, Dorian goes back to his rooms, but Kale stays behind and wants more answers, because obviously he has more questions because he saw more. So she tells him that her grandmother was actually Fae, so she's able to shift into being a Fae, but she hasn't been able to shift since magic disappeared. And then she tells him everything, except for obviously the stuff about the word keys, but about Archer Finn, how he was involved in Nehemia's death, and then basically tells him, like, I realize you were set up, but I can't help but still feel betrayed by the decision that you made. Like, I don't blame you for her death anymore, but I still don't trust you, and I don't see you the same. And Kale actually agrees with this, like, he understands. He's like, you know what, yes, like, I still had a choice to make, and I still made the wrong one. Then Selena's just like, you know what, since I was technically ordered to kill Archer by the king, I'm just gonna go retrieve his body and present it to the king tomorrow and just say that I made the assassination, which technically she did. So I guess that worked in her favor. 2 birds, 1 stone. And then Kale makes one of the dumbest decisions ever. Not just in this book, not just this book, but the whole series. This is the dumbest decision Kale ever makes. And considering how many dumb decisions that Kale makes in this book series, that's saying a lot. He goes to his father and says, I'm gonna strike a deal with you. I think we need to dispatch the king's champion to Wendelin to assassinate the royal family over there. That's another continent full of Fae. And then he tells his father, I'm gonna present this to the king tomorrow. I need you and all the people who are loyal to you to support it so that we can make this happen. So his father makes him a deal. He says, fine, I'll back you up, but you're gonna come home to Aniel and take up your rightful place as my heir. And Kale agrees because he still loves Selena, and he realizes that if anyone finds out that she's Fae, she's dead. So he just wants to get her as far out of here as possible, basically extremely far out of the king's reach. Chapter 53. Selena and Dorian are just hanging out, talking about how his magic manifested. And she tells Dorian, you know what, I'm gonna introduce you to Mort, because Nehemia did tell him that she would explain things to him when the time came, but now she's dead. And Selena just says, you know what? I do know one magical creature who might be able to have some answers for you, so I'll introduce you to my friend Mort. Then we're gonna jump to Dorian's POV, but a little bit later that day, because the council is all meeting together, as they usually do. And Kale presents an idea. A really dumb one that involves sending Selena to Wendlin. And the king's considering it, and all Dorian's wondering is why would Kale intentionally send Selena away? Now we're gonna jump to the king's POV, and this is where stuff gets insane, because he sensed that a portal was open last night. Like, he could feel it in his bones. And he's also aware that Baba Yellowlegs was murdered. So I'll just let that sit with you and freak you out a little bit about what all this man does and does not know. But he summons Selena in front of the entire council and presents Kale's idea. And says, you are to assassinate the king and the prince of Wendlin at this big, huge ball that they're having. It's like this really big festivity. I think it's like their version of Independence Day. Like, it's a big holiday. It's a very public thing. The royal family is present, and he wants her to kill them in a very public way to like make a statement. And then if that wasn't interesting enough, he says, oh, and by the way, you leave tomorrow. Now let's jump back to Selena's POV, because she instantly goes down to the tombs. She's like, you know what? I leave tomorrow. I have less than 24 hours to pick out as much as I can. And who does she run into other than the Queen Elena? And she's panicking because if she's in Wendlin, she cannot find out more about the word keys. But the Queen of Elena reminds her that she's gonna be near Dorneal, which is where most all the Fae are. To this day, and even after rereading this section multiple times, I don't understand why Selena comes to this conclusion, but basically based off something Elena says, it occurs to her that Nehemia knew she was gonna die, and she orchestrated her own death. And I think that does a mix of things for Selena. It gives her some closure, but at the same time, it also makes things significantly worse because she has so many questions, and now she's frustrated at her friend, but she also doesn't want to be frustrated at her dead friend. So it's just like this big, complex, emotional thing. Chapter 54, Kale's point of view after making the dumbest decision of his life, and Dorian comes up to him and starts picking a fight, and Kale lets him, and he's refusing to answer any questions. And they have a huge fight, and frankly, I think this is where we see like the end of their friendship. It's made very clear by the end of this argument, you know what, like, I can't come to you for anything. Like, I thought we kind of had a bonding moment, but you know what, like, clearly I was wrong about you. Then we're gonna jump to Selena's POV because she goes to Nehemia's grave and she makes a blood oath to Nehemia. I will set Eoway free. And she makes that blood oath to Nehemia. Chapter 55. Selena is packing up in her rooms when Dorian comes to visit her, and he came to say goodbye, and it's honestly a really heartfelt goodbye because she was the only person who knew that he had magic who didn't freak out the way that Kale did. Like, Kale's been standoffish with him, and then on top of that is sending Selena away and refusing to explain himself. And so Dorian just feels like he's losing the only other person. Like, Nehemia died, Kale stopped being his friend, and Selena was ready and willing, and she's getting sent away. So Selena's at the docks, ready to hop aboard this boat that's going to take her on a 2-week voyage to Wendlin. She does not want to say goodbye to Kale. First of all, because he's sending her away, but Kale does show up, and he does come to say goodbye. She realizes this might be her only shot because she cannot hunt for the word keys while she's gone, but Kale can. So she tells him about the word keys, literally everything, even her suspicions about the king's involvement, about the creature under the library, about her necklace, the Eye of Elena, and then she even gives that to him. She shares everything she's done, everything she's figured out, everything that the king has done and that she suspected him of doing. And now it's his responsibility because he's sending her away and she can't do it herself. And then the last thing she says before she leaves, she whispers something in his ear. And Kale is very confused. All she can say is, I'm sorry. And then she leaves. And she said, I'm sorry, because she knew that he would need to know that she was sorry when he found out what she whispered in his ear meant. Chapter 56. Kale's brain is aching because he cannot for the life of him understand why the last thing Selena would say to him is a date. Not a year, just a date. And then on top of that, it's the day of the anniversary of her parents' death. I mean, she was so clear and concise about the word keys and even said things that could literally get her killed for even saying them or thinking them. But for some reason, when it came to that date, she just whispered a date. Like, she was not clear. So he decides to go back to her rooms and snoop around to see if he can find some more answers about what in the world this date means. And then he comes across a book of genealogies. So he goes to the date that she gave him, and the last recording of anything on that date was 10 years ago, on the anniversary of her parents' death. This morning, King Orlan Galathynius, his nephew and heir Ro Galathynius, and Ro's wife Evelyn were found assassinated. Orlan was murdered in his bed at the royal palace in Orinth, and Ro and Evelyn were found dead in their beds. There is no word yet about the fate of Ro and Evelyn's daughter, Aelin. Kale grabbed for the first genealogy book, the one on the bloodlines of the royal houses of Adarlan and Terrasen. Was Selena trying to tell him she knew the truth about what had happened that night? That she may know where the lost Princess Aelin was hiding? That she had been there when this happened? He flipped through the pages, scanning the genealogies he'd already read. And then he remembered something about the name Evelyn Ashriver. Ashriver. Evelyn had come from Wendelin and had been a princess of the king's court. Handshaking, he yanked out a book containing Wendelin's royal family tree. On the last page, Aelin Ashriver Galathynius' name was written at the bottom, and above it her mother Evelyn's. But the family tree traced only the female line. The female, not male, because 2 spots above Evelyn's name was written Mab, Aelin's great-grandmother. She was one of the 3 Fae sister queens, Maeve, Mora, and Mab. Mab, the youngest, the fairest, who when she died had been made into a goddess known to them as Diana, Lady of the Hunt. The memory hit him like a brick to the face. That Yulemas morning, in book 1, when Selena had looked so uncomfortable to be receiving the golden arrow of Diana, the arrow of Mab, and Kale counted down the family tree, one after one, until he remembered that Selena had told him, "My great-grandmother was Fae." Kale had to brace a hand to his desk. No, it couldn't be. He turned back to the chronicle, still lying open, and turned to the next day. Aelin Galathynius, heir to the throne of Terrasen, died today or sometime in the night. Before help could reach her deceased parents' estate, the assassin, who had missed her the night before, returned. Her body has still not been found, though some believe it was thrown into the river behind her parents' house. There was a poem scribbled at the top of the Ashriver family tree, as though some student had dashed it down as a reminder while studying. Ashriver eyes, the fairest eyes, from legends of old, of brightest blue ringed with gold. Bright blue eyes ringed with gold. A strangled cry came from Kale. How many times had he looked into those eyes? How many times had he seen her avert her gaze, that one bit of proof that she couldn't hide from the king? Selena Sardothian wasn't in league with Aelin Ashriver Galathynius. Selena Sardothian was Aelin Ashriver Galathynius, heir to the throne and rightful queen of Terrasen. Maybe one day I'll make a whole video about why I'm so emotionally attached to this series, but I kid you not, like, this is one of those moments in the series where, like, your heart drops to your toes the first time you read this. Okay. Selena is Aelin Ashriver Galathynius, the greatest threat to the Adarlan throne. The one person who could raise an army capable of conquering the King of Adarlan. And now she knows the source of the king's power, and Kale just sent her into the arms of her strongest potential allies, where all the Fae are. Dornael. And guess who's the queen of Dornael? Maeve, Selena's great aunt. That is the end of Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I did ask you guys whether or not I should do Heir of Fire or Assassin's Blade next, and it seems like the popular opinion is to go ahead with Heir of Fire. And after Heir of Fire, I will be tackling the Assassin's Blade. For now, you should definitely subscribe, or if you're already subscribed and you're just looking for a way to kill time, I highly recommend checking out my Sarah J. Maas playlist. Not only do I go through the entire plot of the series, but I also talk about a lot of other fun aspects of the Sarah J. Maasverse.